live on Twitch now. So leave there, come here. We're leaving TikTok and joining Twitch. Come. Everybody, yes. Okay, I'm leaving you here. I'm ending you here. Madeline Pendleton over on Twitch. It's fun. I promise. It's fun. Come. Okay. Bye. Ended. We ended with them. Hi, everybody. Hello. And look, I got water to start. You guys are already working on me. 6 relatively quick political questions. I love the organization. I find the organization appealing. So yes. Also, while you do that, I'm going to copy and paste some links I found into a note. Oh my God, the waterboarding is already starting. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll do 4. 4 to start. First time chats. Hi. First time on Twitch. Oh my God. Hi. Welcome. I did end 400 people on TikTok. Oh my God. First time here. Yay. Everybody. Yay. Yes, you made a Discord. Yes, Virgo made a Discord. Please drop the link. Yes. Virgo is our mod for those of you who are new. We respect Virgo. Okay. 6 questions. Let's see. Okay, Child of the Reach. Opinions on transhumanism. The idea that humans should use technology to improve our body and minds and go beyond natural limits. I don't have strong opinions on that. I am neutral on it, but you need to understand I'm like a sci-fi fan. So I unfortunately am like, that sounds cool. The terrors it will bring, but I don't know what the terrors are. So I don't actually have a valid critique. And right now I lean on that sounds cool, but there's probably something wrong with it, I'm sure. Because we can't have nice things. Like we can't just be able to fly like cyborgs without something bad happening. Do I believe reform can ever establish socialism? In certain situations, I think that you can have revolutionless socialism. But like I'm thinking specifically of North Korea, and it's because specifically they were freed from imperial reign. So that was like a really specific situation. So I don't know if that counts as reform or not. Opinions on the automation of workplace through robots and AI. I actually was talking to somebody who is a communist in China, and he was talking about how the difference between how Americans talk about AI versus people in China talk about AI is so interesting. Because in the United States, AI is used as a tool to further oppress and harm us by the owning class, right? Like drive up your rent, like lose your job, all of these things. But in China, they actually use it to help make their lives easier in the workforce. And so I think that AI is probably just a tool like anything. So under capitalism, it's used for evil, but under communism, it could be used for good. Do I believe a revolution will occur in the United States in this century? Yes, unless they introduce a lot of reforms very quickly, things like very high minimum wages, free healthcare, then I think it might be able to push off revolution for another 100 years, unfortunately. But whatever, people would have healthcare and higher wages. So what are you going to do? Number 5, do you have any beliefs you think most Marxists would disagree with? Probably being vegan. I don't think everybody needs to be vegan, but the fact that I'm vegan, I think most Marxists find that weird. And then number 6, opinion on Shining Path. What's Shining Path? They think AI equals ChatGPT. Yeah, it's a wide range of things. Yeah. I don't know what Shining Path is, but I'm interested in learning. So I am going to, right now, copy and paste some sources I pulled up for our Hitler conversation that we've been putting off for days trying to find good sources. Spoiler alert, I did not find good sources, but I found some. So I'm just going to copy and paste these for a minute. So just give me a second so we have them easy to pull up. Not just in my phone. And what I have basically is a bunch of different bad sources, but with different perspectives. So I'm like, through these bad sources, we will maybe be able to get to the truth together, which is what I have to do a lot for my podcast, full disclosure. And I have one poli-sci student, which is not a very reliable source. So that's what I mean, where I'm like, these are like bad sources. But this is actually kind of niche. I think a lot of people don't talk about this. My computer doesn't want to paste now. Cool. 5 seconds remaining to paste a link. Love it. Awesome. Okay. But we will still talk about it with these bad sources. And if anybody has good sources, share with the chat now. Specifically about... Basically, the Social Democrats, they're liberals, in Germany versus the communists as Hitler was rising to power. Like the Social Democrats. All right. That's what we're talking about. How are Shein Temu manufacturers in China exploitative if China is supposed to be a socialist country? So the thing you need to remember is that socialism is a transition phase, right? So there are still lingering elements of capitalism left over. Now, since the labor code overhaul of 2008, I believe, China has made immense progress in cleaning up their factories. But it's important to remember that sweatshops can happen anywhere. Sweatshops happen in LA. Sweatshops happen in London. Sweatshops happen hugely in Bangladesh. So what you're really looking at is just the ratio of sweatshop labor, exploitative labor versus above board labor. And in China, they've managed to flip that ratio quite a bit. So Shein, Temu, those are more marketplaces. Temu's prices, actually, most of the prices on Temu look fine to me. They look like prices just to pay for Chinese manufacturing. They don't look super, super cheap to me. Shein's a different story. It looks super, super cheap to me. But I would say that it's a marketplace. So a lot of the stuff on Shein is getting made in Bangladesh. It's not getting made in China. Shein itself isn't even based in China. That company is owned and operated in Singapore. They just use some Chinese manufacturing, and they're even moving away from it and more into Bangladesh manufacturing because China is it's harder to have a sweatshop in China. They just crack down on it way faster now. But those are still private businesses. Private business still exists in China because they are in this process of transitioning out of capitalism into socialism. So there's still elements of capitalism left over, if that makes sense. If you have any other questions, though, I am happy to talk to you about it. Making clothing is my job, so I can talk about that all day long. Gifted subs. Yay, thank you. You're here for the commie unity that we shockingly lack. Yeah, I mean, look, here's my thing. Madeline, your hesitancy around transhumanism is sensing the fact that Peter Thiel and other billionaires are at the frontier of that ideology. See, it's always used for evil. We can't have nice things. Science fiction taught me this. I watched it enough. Oh, you guys saw I added the Karl Marx emote, right? I updated our emotes a little bit in there. Yes, of course. Hi, everybody. Okay. So we have to talk about this Hitler thing because we've been putting it off. It's not really current events, but it is relevant to current events. So I did fix the podcast episode. I should have fixed the podcast episode. If it's not fixed, let me know, but I should have fixed it. I'm going to listen right now. Let's see if I fixed it. Hold on. Let's see. I'm scared. I thought I did it. You guys will learn this. Like, I have so much in my day that everything I do is half-assed. That's like the Madeline way. I do a lot very quickly, but it's not very thorough. Okay.
It does have, and like, I think, most cities have this eventually, right? Like the feeling that, and the Persian, and after 1828,
it's updated.
Edge me out.
It's fixed. It is correct now. Okay. Another gifted sub. Thank you guys. Yeah, it's to stop myself from burning out, basically. Yeah, I'm pretty good at knowing, like, this is as much as I can give this project. And this is something I had to learn to manage my ADHD. If you have ADHD, this might be useful to you. I set up a time. And, like, whatever happens by the time this time is done, it's done. That's it. It doesn't matter how good it is, how bad it is, it's done. And I complete more tasks that way. And it's very, very helpful. You just listened to the bonus episode, like, 15 minutes ago on the main feed? What is maybe the provider didn't update it. What do you listen through? Maybe I can figure out if a certain provider hasn't updated it. Hydrate. I'm doing a hydrate. Maybe I can look and see. I just have this like gnarly plan. I showed it actually the other day. I'll show you guys on here. Let's see if I can find it. My little schedule. Where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, I'll show you guys. So this is my daily schedule. So really, technically, I only have until 9:30 to stream, but I started late. So I know then that I'm going to run into my TikTok time for today. And I don't have any personal tasks to accomplish today, so that gives me some buffer. But I hard start. Today I'm doing tunnel vision from 1 to 7 is what I have scheduled, but it'll probably be more like 12 to 6. But yeah, so this is like a kind of a daily template for my schedule. So right now the time is 9:12. So I'm super late, and I'm only going to be able to stream until 10 or 10:30 because you guys know my friend Lola uses my house to do laundry when she cleans my other friend's house. She's a house cleaner, but she doesn't like my friend's washing machine. But I got a new washing machine, so I have to teach Lola how to use it. So I'm going to have to jump off when Lola comes. So we don't have a lot of time. Yeah. We got a hype chest. Frog wow emote. Guys, we've unlocked a frog wow emote. Wow. Okay. Love. Yeah. All right, so let's get into this because I don't have a lot of time, and I want to make sure that we don't skip this Hitler thing because I know everybody's been asking for a long time, and we were trying to figure it out. So, again, these are bad sources. So let's get into it with our bad sources. Now, this is super relevant to what we were talking about the other day when we were reading the Gramsci text in particular and the Stalin text and that one Trotsky text, which basically is just like, look, I always say this. Who did the JFK assassination? I don't know. I'm not sure. Not the communists, I don't think, even though that guy did spend some time in the USSR. All right, so the important thing to remember that we reviewed when we read all that theory, and this is why theory is important, it sets you up to understand real world events, is that liberalism is not a force capable of defeating fascism, right? So liberalism, capitalism, free market capitalism, liberalism in the classic sense of the word, neoliberalism, classical liberalism, it's a free market ideology. So if you ever want to piss off your conservative Republican grandpa or uncle at a family event, just remind them they're a liberal too, right? So what we here in the United States call Democrats and Republicans, they both are part of liberalism as an ideology. It is a free market, capitalist, laissez-faire ideology. Right? So the only difference between conservatives and progressives here in the United States, Democrats and Republicans operating under that umbrella of liberalism, the free market as an ideology, is where exactly they think the balance should be between how much freedom business has versus how much freedom individuals have. So they all believe that business should have some freedom to exploit you, basically. But they have different beliefs about how much freedom you as an individual should have to not be fully exploited by business. So you think of it as a slider. The sliders between my right to not be murdered by my boss for profit and my boss's right to murder me for profit. Where do you lie on that scale? How much? How close can we get to either direction? And you're never going to have it perfect, right? Under capitalism, they're not going to tell you your boss can't murder you for profit, but they're going to be like, the circumstances just have to be really specific. Because the free market has freedom. The market is protected with its freedom. That's capitalism is protected. So this ideology is only possible to be maintained with violence because it's not good for people. The only way you're going to maintain this ideology is through violence. So there's a couple ways this violence plays out. Domestically with the police force, right? The most obvious example that's very, very direct of this here in the United States is when we made slavery illegal, we were like, well, but if we catch him doing a crime, then we can make them slaves then, right? 13th Amendment, boom, right? Very, very obviously. That's a very direct example of that. Now, an indirect example of that might be internationally. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. So imperialism is basically like when you run out of resources and people to exploit at home, you're going to need to start looking around the world for other countries to do this to. And they're not going to like that you're doing it there. So you got to use force to enact it. So if you run out of materials here, you run out of oil in the United States, what do? You go to Venezuela, you go to Iran, you start trying to take their oil, and they're not going to let you do it. So you need a big, big, huge military to back you up to make that happen. And this, obviously, we saw a lot of this happen with colonization. That was at the start of kind of the capitalism heyday, right? So this is why liberalism as an ideology necessarily requires violence to uphold it, whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a conservative here in the United States or Republican. So the Democrats, you will see, they cannot be a party of peace. They cannot be an anti-war party, very obviously. We saw Kamala Harris campaign on having the most lethal military in the world. That's why the Democrats will not abolish ICE. They won't. Now they can talk about how cruel ICE is. Oh, ICE is so cruel. They won't abolish it. Biden gave ICE the highest numbers, the biggest budget it had had ever, right, before Donald Trump. And Kamala Harris said that ICE was necessary and good. So these people, these Democrats, they cannot offer you an ideology free of violence. Now, what we talked about in the Gramsci piece that's really, really relevant here is what happens then when capitalism, free market capitalism as we know it, liberalism in that sense of the word, comes up against fascism, right? They're born from the same kind of things. I always say, okay, so if capitalism is private ownership of business for private profit, fascism is private ownership of business for public profit, not even public, for government profit, basically. Private ownership of business for private profit with government control. That's more what it is. All right. So capitalists can profit off of fascism. You can still privately own a business in fascism. You can do private business deals in fascism. And in many ways, it will be more profitable because if you are not getting the results you want from a business, under fascism, the government will show up with the military, stick a gun at the back of a worker's head and say, work harder or we'll blow your head off, right? That's what fascism brings to the table. You have the government controlling your private business and your private profits, and they're in on it. And the ideology behind this is fascists think whatever is good for these private businesses operating within the state is going to be good for the state. It's going to benefit the state. So the government is more than happy to lend its full weight to supporting you as a business owner and exploiting your workers. That is the ultimate ideology of fascism. So the thing, though, is that fascism as an ideology takes even more violence to uphold because it's even more directly shitty, right, than capitalism is, which means that you're going to have this inherent crisis that comes about when capitalism, liberalism comes up against fascism, right? Because the capitalists are going to be like, I don't necessarily want to stop this because I can make money off this guy. Things are looking really good for the economy for me right now. I can profit off of this. So I'm going to play nice with him, right? They're not prepared to do what's necessary to stop this guy from gaining power. Now, the only people who don't profit from this guy are people who reject capitalism, people who are post-capitalist ideology, people who are like, we don't want capitalism, this is bad and harmful, we need to be moving away from capitalism into socialism and communism. They do not profit off of fascism. So they have no reason to hedge their bets, to play nice, to try to compromise. And that's why I always say pretty much all of modern human history, contemporary human history, is the battle between communists, socialists, and fascists. Well, the capitalists look on and go, if only I could do something, because they're just making money off the whole thing. So that is the kind of thing that we see historically, that we also see happening today, right? Democrats are not going to be able to stop Republicans. Republicans now flirting very overtly with fascism, getting more fascist, just more overtly fascist. Democrats are classic liberals. They're not going to be able to stop this. They're making money off of it. They don't want to stop it. And a lot of the systems that benefit fascism benefit them as well. So this is why all the people who are looking to the Democratic Party to stop them from Donald Trump, sorry, they're not going to do it. They don't profit from it. Or when they do realize, like, oh, this is actually bad for us too, it's going to be way too late. So this is a situation today, how it's relevant, right, for them and for what we see ourselves dealing with. Now, what Gramsci said that I thought was really interesting and applicable here is that this conflict for liberals, for capitalists, will be their ultimate undoing. Because in order to position themselves as being different than the fascists, they will have to fall back into rhetoric of pacifism to also justify why they're not doing anything about the fascism. So as everybody looks on and is like, hey, these fascists are coming to power, it looks really bad and violent, liberals, capitalists, why aren't you doing something to stop it? You have power. They're going to have to invent a reason that they're not stopping it. Because they're not stopping it because they profit off of it. But they can't tell you that because that looks fucked up. Because then they're just the same as, like, they lose all their political power, there's going to be a revolution, whatever. So they have to invent a reason. So the number one reason they end up defaulting to is pacifism. They're like, we can't stoop to their level, then we're just as bad as them. We need to rely on the existing peaceful institutions to help us get us where we need to be. Now, when they say that, what they're doing is basically telling you not to have a revolution. They're like, no, the peaceful institutions will fix it, because having a revolution would be... Sorry, I don't know why my camera does that. Having a revolution would be violent and bad, right? You don't want violence or bad things to happen. That is them trying to dissuade you, the public, from having a revolution, right? So they're going to try to convince you to rely on their old capitalist liberal institutions, and these institutions are going to fix it just fine. That is necessarily going to push them into a corner where they are pacifistic, where they are not able to stand up with any sort of militarized or violent power against the fascists. And this, Gramsci says, will ultimately be their undoing, right? They are bringing words to a gunfight, in part because they are profiting from it. And second of all, because their rhetoric forces them into this corner where to differentiate themselves from the fascists, they will have to be like, we can't use violence, and that will be their undoing. So, bye, Virgo. So this is the situation we find ourselves in, right? You see a lot of everyday Americans going, why aren't the Democrats doing something? And they don't understand. The Democrats, it doesn't profit them to do something. They're not going to do something. And in fact, they are going to fall back on and double down on those same old feckless institutions that aren't able to accomplish anything, right? They're going to be like, but it's illegal. I passed a congressional resolution. And it's like, that's, they're blowing women's heads off with fucking guns pointed in their car windows. I don't think the congressional resolution is really going to do anything in this situation. It's not happening. So this will lead to their defeat. So this is what's important to talk about when we talk about the context of Germany, right? Hitler's rise to power. Now, being a communist, how I was always taught the story about what happened when Hitler rose to power is this. You had a category of social democrats, right? More progressive. Oh yeah, what do? I'm going to turn these off. Settings gear icon below the chat window. Celebrations. I'm going to look, thank you. You know what? I think I have to be on Twitch on the back end to do it. I don't think it has it on here. But I'm going to do it. Thank you. They are annoying. I appreciate it. Oh, stretch. Oh, thanks. Okay, so this is exactly what was going on, with Hitler. We had the Social Democrats. I believe they're the SDP was their initials. And they were ostensibly kind of socialist in name, but not Marxist, not communist, didn't have a strong ideology. And basically they believed in reforming capitalism. And a lot of their policies did end up upholding capitalism. Then we had the communists, who I believe were the KVP. We'll see. We'll fact check the acronyms. And they were the actual communists who were like, no, like, this is not a solution. This isn't going to do anything, etc. And then you had the fascists coming to power. So this is kind of what, sorry, one more stretch. They were dealing with this exact situation that Gramsci talked about, that we've been talking about with the beginning of Hitler. Now, liberals will tell you what happened is that all that needed to occur was the communists needed to team up with the Social Democrats, the liberals, the capitalists, basically, the more progressive capitalists, and together they would have been able to stop Hitler. Now, the communists will tell you, no, the Social Democrats, the liberals, capitulated to Hitler over and over and over again under the guise of this, like, I don't know, faith in institutions or something, and we were like, that's bullshit, like, you're not gonna be able to fight them. And regardless of which interpretation of the facts you fall on, it is true that if they had united the communists and the capitalists, the Social Democrats, the capitalist reformers, the more progressive capitalists, together they did have enough numbers to defeat Hitler. But again, you have to ask, obviously, Hitler, very bad, right? Very, very bad. But the communists were watching the liberals kind of make capitulations and allowances to Hitler. And it's worth noting, ultimately, in the end, it wasn't capitalists or Democrats that were able to stop Hitler. It was communists. It was not the German communists, because Hitler killed them all, but it was the communists in the USSR. So I think the important things as we go through this information to remember is that the communists were correct that the Social Democrats were not equipped to defeat Hitler. The Social Democrats' idea of defeating Hitler would have been to just like get enough votes and then Hitler never would have happened. That's speculative. We have no way of knowing that. Based on what we know of Hitler, I don't think just not getting enough votes would have barred him from having complete political power at some juncture in Germany, given the situation in Germany at the time. You could just as easily say, if the communists had teamed up with Hitler, they would have had more support than the capitalists. It's like, it doesn't matter. These are three totally different ideologies. So again, we find ourselves in a situation where the progressive liberals feel entitled to the support of the communists, even while enacting political policies that the communists are appalled by and repulsed by and do not like. Right, they're not willing to compromise with the communists, really, in order to fight this. But somehow the communists get blamed. And that's how it happens all the time. So looking at these, what I am going to say is that hindsight's 20/20, right? Maybe if we were in this situation today, we would have been like, fuck, okay, we are just going to team up with the Democratic Socialists because we know what happened with Hitler and we're just going to do it and see what happens. Maybe not, though. Maybe we would have been like, the inevitability is Hitler, and the only thing that defeats him in the end is communism. Why would we capitulate to the thing that gives him more power? So, it's a very interesting kind of situation. So I think we're going to go through this. I'm going to show you guys some sources. Again, they were all bad sources, and we're going to talk about them. So the first one I have pulled up is Law and Liberty. And they have an assessment of what occurred here. It's a little bit long, but it's not too bad. So we'll read through it. We'll skip around a little bit. Hitler didn't even win. The liberals won and chose to put him in power. Thank you, Helmut Guzzler. So 90 years ago, Adolf Hitler was sworn into office as Chancellor of Germany. January 30th, 1933 would henceforth be regarded by Germany's National Socialists as the Machtergreifung, the day that the Nazis seized power and began consigning the Weimar Republic to its grave. Hitler never made any secret of his intention to strike against those he saw as his enemies once his grip on power had been consolidated. It was thus a considerable personal risk that a young German economics professor delivered a public lecture in Frankfurt, Maine, just 8 days after Hitler took office, in which he made his clear opposition to the new government. Wilhelm Röpke was already known as an outspoken critic of Nazism. He had even personally campaigned against the Nazi Party. "You will be complicit," he wrote in one 1930 election pamphlet, "if you vote Nazi or for a party that has no reservations about forming a government with the Nazis." So this is kind of important because this is what the communists thought that the social democrats, the capitalists, the progressive capitalists were going to do. That pointed oar was a shot at those conservative political or military elites who 3 years later would allow Hitler into office under the illusion that they could control him. It would not have been difficult for Röpke to adapt himself to post-January 1933 German political realities. For one thing, he was not Jewish. Moreover, Röpke was a decorated combat veteran who had served with distinction in the trenches on the Western Front. Young and athletic, he even looked like the Aryan Übermensch extolled by Nazi ideology. At the age of 24, Röpke had become the youngest professor in Germany, and by 1933, his fame as an economist was European-wide. Had Röpke been willing to compromise, he could have gone far under the new regime. Röpke's February 1933 lecture, however, indicated that he was not going to bend. From that moment on, he had no future in the Third Reich. When the Nazis succeeded to power in 1933, the effect was not mass consternation on the part of those with misgivings. And I think this is all what's really important. You kind of see how people just kind of let this happen. Even the most important German Jewish representative group, the Central Association of German Citizens of Jewish Faith, maintained that despite the Nazis' ferocious anti-Semitism, nobody would dare to touch their constitutional rights. In his February 8th lecture, Röpke demonstrated that he had no such illusions. Entitled Epochenwende, End of an Era, Röpke's lecture spelled out precisely why Hitler's entry into the chancellery represented something entirely different from a normal change of government. National Socialism's triumph constituted, Röpke stated, a defeat for freedom, for reason and freedom. The Nazi movement, he told his audience, with its naked appeal to moods and emotions and constant invocation of myth, blood, and the primordial soul, left no room for such things. Now, I want to take a second here to talk about Trump and how Trump has been positioned by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has basically tried to position Hitler as Trump, or Trump as Hitler, right? But the thing that's really interesting is that those of us old enough to have seen other Republicans in office know that Trump is actually not a unique evil for the United States. Like, this was Reagan, this was Nixon, this was George W. Bush, and more importantly, these are the same policies the Democratic Party enacts, just quietly, right? So, for example, something most people don't know is that the police murdered more unarmed civilians in the United States under Biden than under the first Trump presidency, than under these previous presidencies, than even before George Floyd. So we just didn't talk about it. So I think that's what's something unique about the United States versus, Hitler in Germany, right? Hitler was not business as usual. Trump, the only reason that he is not business as usual is that he is more overt and out in the open. He is more mask off about what the United States is. But this has always been what the United States is, right? The Nazis studied the United States to learn how to do Nazi shit. So this is something unique that's not exactly transferable to the United States, I don't think, right? So, yeah, this is not new for us. We know what they're going to do. And also, we live in a situation where Democrats encroach upon people's constitutional rights all the time, right? So, this isn't really as pertinent of an argument here today because our government is so right-wing already. Right. Not only Röpke insisted were stupidity and stupor being inculcated in a way that beggars description, that one we do have. Every immoral and brutal act he observed is justified by the sanctity of the political end for the Nazis. The threats to destroy entire groups, Jews in Germany, and hereditary enemies of all kind, were not, Röpke argued, mere rhetoric designed to whip up populist resentment that would quietly be shelved once the Nazis took power. It was integral, Röpke knew, to the entire National Socialist project. Also worth noting, again, the current border czar, right, under Donald Trump was Obama's guy. So this is what's different here. It's a continuation of evil, but Trump is more mask off and honest about it. Trump is the guy who will get on the news and be like, of course the CIA is doing things in Iran and in Venezuela. We want to steal their oil. Why wouldn't we send the CIA there to do psyops? Like, what? He's just very mask off with it. So, liberalism as civilization. Röpke's lecture went beyond listing all the deep problems with the Nazi movement. He also sought to identify the essence of what the highly ideological movements of the right and left, then striving for power across Europe, wanted to annihilate. Here we come to the second dimension of Röpke's lecture, his defense of liberalism. And again, liberalism, when they use it, they don't use it in the American way. We use it in the classical liberalism way, capitalism, basically. By liberalism, Röpke did not have in mind the liberal parties of Weimar Germany, who had been squeezed out by the German communists to their left and the National Socialists on their right, nor was he thinking of the liberal thinkers and movements that wielded considerable influence in 19th century Europe. Today's rebellion against liberalism, Röpke stated, is not a mere rebellion against perishable ideas and modes of thought of the 19th century. Liberalism was not to be equated with that century's political or economic liberalism, he's saying. By this, he had in his mind industrial capitalism and figures like the British Liberal Prime Minister, William Gladstone. Okay, so he's saying capitalism is actually what he means by this. He said liberalism served in Röpke's lecture as a synonym for the integration of Greco-Roman, Jewish, and Christian and Enlightenment ideas, culture, and institutions that he believed constituted the civilization of the West. Oh, okay, sorry. So he's saying, no, not the capitalism parts. Ignore the capitalism parts. What about just like the ideology? Like just the idea that we should be free. This is what he's saying. Sorry about that. Because usually when people talk about liberalism, that is what they're talking about. And very obviously, this is a fallacy for him to say that. You cannot separate like the free market ideology from classical liberalism as like an idea surrounding your personal liberties. Those two things are inherently related. So, Nazism and Bolshevism, for that matter, should, Röpke maintain, to be recognized as an insurrection against that particular complexion of concepts, expectations, and institutions. So remember we talked about the sliding scale, the freedom of the free market to exploit you versus your freedom to not be exploited by the free market? This is why these things can't be separated. He's like, well, let's just forget about the capitalism part, and what about just the freedom part? And it's like, well, you can't. They are the same thing, and that is particularly exactly why liberalism will be feckless in the face of fascism. And he's, of course, doing the same thing where he's like, well, the fascists are just as bad as the communists. Why? If you're only concerned about individual freedoms, which communism grants you, right, why would they be just as bad as each other? Well, because communism rejects the free market ideology. So we see what he really believes here. What do we have? Should I click this for everybody? Ghost in this hell? Oh, chat settings. Thank you. Celebrations. Yes. Okay. Got it. Thank you. I'm going to look later. So horseshoe theory. Yes. He's trying to basically do a horseshoe theory. These two things are just as bad as each other. And they're obviously fucking not, right? People just like capitalism and they don't want to do away with it. And a lot can be said, actually, about how people are kicking and screaming, rejecting this idea that socialism, communism is the inevitable future. I happen to mention, on Saturday, I went to an optometrist, and the optometrist ended up being a communist. Totally random. And I tweeted about it. I was like, just went to the optometrist and he was a communist. We're everywhere, we live amongst you. And people were losing their minds. They were like, we're going to find you all and kill you. Like in the replies on Twitter. And I was like, this is the dying breath of a failing empire. Like, we are your future. Like, communism, socialism is your future. It is the post-capitalist ideology. It is the next step. You are so resistant to change that you are kicking and screaming, trying to deny it, right? But it is inevitable. So very, very interesting. And this is kind of what we see here with him, too, with Röpke, this guy. So, as a distinguished free market economist, obviously, he's an economist. He's a free market guy, which is also why you're like, you can't strip out the free market economy thing from just like the nice, feel-good Greco-Roman Enlightenment culture. Like, it's still capitalism that you're describing. So he says he was still, this says, Röpke was well aware of the role played by hyperinflation that had economically undermined and politically radicalized parts of the German middle class during the early 1920s, as well as the Great Depression that propelled Nazi party to power. The present world crisis, he said, outranges all standards in the past. Again, capitalism. It's like, that's why people say fascism is capitalism in crisis. When capitalism falls apart, which it inevitably does, it presents an opportunity for fascism to take over. The economic downturn that began in 1929 had driven Germany to the political abyss by shattering the relative stability that Weimar had attained by 1926. Röpke, however, was neither an economic determinist nor a philosophical materialist. The political situation in which Germany found itself should not, he claimed, be understood as the country's entry into a new historical era of the type predicted by Marxist dialectics. So, see, they're just like, no, we're not going to socialism. We're hanging on back here. And it really is this resistance to progress, right, that gets people in these situations, which is wild. So the deeper cause for many Germans' embrace of the Nazis, in Röpke's view, was the turning of those whom he called the masses, but also a fair number of professors, against very specific values in the name of Germany's awakening and the purification of the German soul, nationalism. The delicate and sophisticated arrangements of capitalism and liberal constitutionalism, Röpke argued, relied upon some decidedly non-materialist foundations, that many Germans had either been persuaded to reject or never really internalized. One such premise of liberalism to which Röpke's lecture devoted particular attention was every person's individuality, right? And this is the contradiction of capitalism. Your individuality is so important. You must be a cog in the machine for your boss to have his individuality to own a business that you labor for. That's how individualism works, right? It's a contradiction. Liberalism, he said, involved a belief in every individual's human dignity. But again, only insofar as it comes up against your boss, right? Yeah. And the profound conviction that man must never be degraded into an object, again, unless you're like a cog in the machine that is your boss's workplace. That, Röpke said, was why liberalism rejected the oppression of people because of their race or religion. Liberalism relies on the oppression of people based on their race or religion to turn people against each other, the workers, so that they do not rise up against their boss. A coherent conception of tolerance itself was impossible, he noted, without an in-principle affirmation of every individual's inherent dignity, not least because it ruled out treating one's political opponents as enemies who belong to a different group and who would ultimately have to be reduced to the status of non-citizens or expelled from the body politic altogether. It was no coincidence, Röpke argued, that the National Socialists submerged everything into the people's community, folk community, or racial community. For the Nazis, what matters was the group, in their case, the racial collective. So, the group kind of under fascism, usually what it is the state is what they mean. So the main economic and political motivation of fascism is the good of the state. And really what Mussolini talked about when he created fascism as an ideology was that the state's power was the most important thing that you could have, right? So anything that served the good of the state was good. And that is why his economic ideology, corporatism, that he developed, was literally like we boost up these corporations, these privately owned corporations for these rich guys. They're incentivized to help provide basically these things that we need for the state. But the state will back these corporations because it's good for us that they're making cars, that they're making things we need to live, that they're building houses, whatever. Very, very interesting, but still with the profit thing there. And for people who are obsessed with horseshoe theory, remember, Mussolini himself said that his ideology was the opposite of Marxism, right? He had studied Marx, he didn't like it, and he was like, I'm inventing something that's the opposite of socialism, of communism, of Marxism. So just remember, that's an important point to hit with people. And if you were on the TikTok live when we were talking about this, remember the way to do it, if somebody's like, well, horseshoe theory, they're the same, just be like, oh, I thought Mussolini said that fascism was literally the opposite of Marxism and he hated Marxism and communism. I thought that he said that in his writing. Huh. Oh, anyway, that's the best way you can kind of drop that info for people because most people actually don't know that. Okay. Bye, Silverstar. So this goes on to talk more about the ideology of liberalism. I'm not sure how much more we have to read, though, about it. It's not really about things that actually occurred so much as it is the ideology of Nazi Germany and how everybody... Yeah, he also said that he's against capitalism. Exactly. It's its own unique ideology. So that's why it's important to remember. Oh, yay, Aaron and Hal. I'm happy I started streaming, too. I like it, too. Sorry I'm talking really fast in this one. It's just because I know that I'm going to have to jump off somewhere between 10 and 10:30. So I want to get all the content into this one. So apologies. This is one where I'm, like, speed running it. But, yeah, I think that's important to remember. These are three distinct ideologies. Oh, hydrating. Got you both. All right. So this is just an affirmation about one of the things that becomes a point of confusion for the capitalists and the liberals, right? They really think that there is a way to preserve and save these liberal institutions. But something that's very telling is even they acknowledge liberalism because of its contradictions, capitalism because of its contradictions, it teeters upon an unsteady foundation, right? It doesn't take much to knock it off of its little post and have it crumble into chaos and confusion. And this is something that capitalists are in denial about. They are in denial about how this period only exists as a transition period. It does not have the strength to be long-term. This is not a long-term movement. This is a movement that only has a lifespan of a couple of 100 years in it because it has so many contradictions. It has no choice but to fall apart. Civstream win, do not tempt me with a good time. I feel like I'd have to get my partner too, though. I've told you guys my partner's like ridiculously good at video games, right? Like it's like wild. Like I recently made my partner play on the hardest Civ mode, which is like Immortal. And because they always play on this easy-ish mode. And I'm like, girl, this is like wild. And they won and they were like, oh, that was like super easy. And I'm like they're very, very good at video games. It's kooky. So I need them on it too. Maybe repeat what Mussolini said. I'm writing notes right now. Yes. Oh, is this the one? Bisco Witch, thank you. So, this might be the one. Let me see. Mussolini, economic doctrine of fascism. Okay, yeah, this is what we want. Hold on. So if you look up the Doctrine of Fascism, 1932 by Mussolini, he talks about this in here. Yeah, this is the one. He talks about Marxism and how his ideology is not Marxism. He says, fascism is the resolute negation of the doctrine underlying so-called scientific and Marxian socialism, the doctrine of historic materialism, which would explain the history in mankind in terms of the class struggle and by changes in the process and instruments of production, to the exclusion of all else. So he goes on to talk about his ideology is the opposite of that. So this is something. The Doctrine of Fascism, you guys know it's hard for me to copy and paste in here. Civ has been around for forever. I know. We used to play when we were kids, and then I didn't play again really until like when Civ 7 came out. I played it like for a few months, and I was like, eh. But then when my partner and I started dating, now we do these like locked in gnarly sessions for like all day Saturday usually. Yes, this is it. Yes, this is it. Yeah, it's also funny because it's like pretty short. I don't know why that's funny to me. I'm like, Marx wrote multiple books about it. And Mussolini was like, here's the pamphlet. I'm done. You're like, I have heard of Tropico and my partner loves Tropico. And I was like, we should play Tropico. Yeah, my partner's under the impression that politically I will be amused by the concepts in Tropico. Okay, so let's see. Doctrine of Fascism, everybody check it out. All right, so we're going to go on to a different source now, and we're going to take a look at this Holocaust explainer. You know, whatever, it's specific. So this section of this Holocaust explainer, again, we don't have good sources for today, I'm so sorry, basically talks about how the conservative elite and the business classes, the capitalists, really capitulated to Hitler in Germany. Basically, they were becoming very frustrated with the economic and political instability in Germany, which, again, that's capitalism, babe. It's always going to be unstable. And they were really upset with not having any real political power and the rise of communism. So they believed that they needed what they called authoritarian rule, which we usually... Sorry. Just hit my charger of my computer. Which we usually only associate with communism, right? But they were like, we need something like that. But for us, the business class, that literally is fascism. That is fascism. So the first move towards this was Hindenburg increasing use Article 48. Between 1925 and 1931, Article 48 was used a total of 16 times. So Article 48, which just does this. Oh, that's nice. So this was a part of the Constitution there that allowed the president to rule by decree in state of an emergency, bypassing the elected kind of parliament system. So kind of like a state of emergency, where it's like, it's a state of emergency, I just call the shots. I can see the historic fascist. He debunked lefty Marx in a one-shot letter. So funny. In 1931 alone, this rose to be used 42 times in comparison to only 35 laws being passed in the same year. So basically, in 1931, Parliament passed 35 rulings and just, the leader of Germany on his own was able to do it 42 times. So this was consolidating power under an executive branch, which is what Trump has been seeking to do, and the Federalists have been seeking to do with Project 2025, obviously, but also with the Heritage Foundation in general, since it was founded in the 80s especially, but even going back to like Nixon era. But really, I think with Reagan, this solidified that their goal was to consolidate power in the United States under the executive branch, the presidential branch. And you'll see the Democrats actually like this too. That's why they don't roll back any of those changes that Republicans make in this pursuit when it's their time to have power. In 1932, Article 48 was used 58 times. The conservative elite's second move towards this kind of authoritarian rule, was helping, I don't like the word authoritarian, you guys know, but fascist rule, single kind of leader rule, was helping the Nazi Party to gain power. The conservative elite and the Nazi Party had a common enemy, the political left. Right? So they always team up, right? The capitalists would rather side with fascists than the left 100% of the time. As Hitler controlled the masses' support for the political right, the conservative elite believed that they could use Hitler and his popular support to democratically take power. Once in power, Hitler could destroy the political left. Destroying the political left would help remove the majority of political opponents to the right-wing conservative elite. So these would be like your standard capitalists here in the United States today. Maybe some of them are Republicans, maybe some of them are Democrats, though. Once Hitler had removed the left-wing socialist opposition and destroyed the Weimar Republic, the conservative elite thought they would be able to replace Hitler and appoint a leader of their choice. As Hitler's votes dwindled in the November 1932 elections, the conservative elite knew that if they wanted to use Hitler and the Nazis to destroy the political left, they had to act quickly to get Hitler appointed as chancellor. So this is what somebody was saying earlier when they were like, he didn't even win an election! The liberals put him in charge! The conservative elite are the liberals here in the United States, yes. But again, liberalism, big tent, some might be Republicans, some might be Democrats. Von Papen and Oskar von Hindenburg, President Hindenburg's son, met secretly and backed Hitler to become chancellor. Again, remember Hillary Clinton's Pied Piper strategy where she amplified Donald Trump as a political candidate? The motive was a little different. She thought he'd be easier to beat, but, it's the same kind of thing. The liberals, the progressives, whatever, the conservatives, the rich, whatever you want to call them, the conservative elite, the capitalists, they're always trying to pull the shots for who they want to have power. And they are not afraid of trying to amplify, for whatever their own means are, the voice of a weirdo, super racist, fascist dude if it serves their purpose. And I think that's the common thread to see here. A group of important industrialists, including Hjalmar Schacht and Gustav Krupp, also wrote outlining their support of Hitler to President Hindenburg. The support of these figures was vital in Hindenburg's decision to appoint Hitler as chancellor. Once elected, the conservative elite soon realized that they had miscalculated him and his intentions. Despite the party restructure, the organization of the SA, and the initial development of the propaganda under Goebbels, the Nazi Party gained very little in the 1928 elections. They won just 2.6% of the vote. Similarly, the Nazis in Ukraine had only around 2% of the popular vote. However, it did not stop them from basically running what was going on with the 2014 political elections. I think Lola might be here. Hold on just a sec. Fork screensaver. I'll be right back. Okay, no, Fork just lied to me. That is so mean. Nothing was even there. She's a liar. Ugh. Okay. My bad. Fork's a liar. Sorry. All right, so despite the party restructure, the reorganization of the SA, and the initial development of their propaganda under Goebbels, Goebbels. David says it like Goebbels. I think that's correct, right? I made it. I drew Fork. She probably did see a squirrel. We do not besmirch Commander Fork. She's not reactionary. She's just thinking 2 steps ahead of us, okay? So, all right. They won 2.6% of the vote. And again, like I was saying, in Ukraine, the Nazis in Ukraine, the Banderites, they only had 2% of the popular vote, but it did not stop them from wielding more political power despite their relatively low polling support. So they got 12 seats in the Reichstag. That's like the parliament, right? Goebbels. Okay. The following year, however, the Wall Street crash and the resulting economic and political instability swung the conservative elite and electorate in their favor. Goebbels. I think I can speak German. I said in one stream every word I couldn't pronounce I was just going to do in a bad Italian accent. Gabelles. So that's what that would be. All right. Carefully tailored propaganda slowly became considerably more attractive. Oh yeah, sorry, screen share. You said that earlier and I saw it and then I was like, I need a screen share and then just kept going. Sorry, guys. Gerbil's better. We're going to call him Gerbil. That's good. In 1930, the Nazis attracted 8 more times the number of votes than in 1928. Pretty wild. They managed to secure 18% of the vote and 107 seats in the Reichstag. So again, what we're seeing here, economic crisis, people turn to fascism because they want more control. The continuing failure of the government to stabilize the situation only increased the Nazis' popularity. In February of 1932, Hitler ran against Hindenburg to become president, and Goebbels' propaganda campaign presented Hitler as a new, dynamic, and modern leader for Germany. To emphasize this point, Hitler flew from venue to venue via airplane, which was like, oh. Hitler lost the election with 36.8% of the vote to Hindenburg's 53%. Oh, my light died. Hold on, I'm going to get the charger. Honestly, you guys, if you do streaming and you're not like a real person, the way I'm not a real person and I don't know how to like do these types of things, the light is a good investment. I do think the light's a good investment. I'm just going to say. The light really changed my streaming game. And I use it on my phone for things too. Like, look at that. It's totally worth it. Aeroplane. Lighting is everything. You can see how greasy my hair is because I haven't gotten ready yet this morning. Okay. So, in February 1932, Hitler ran against Hindenburg to become president. Oh, we talked about this. Okay, he lost the election, 36.8% of the vote to Hindenburg's 53%. And following another Reichstag election, like parliament election in July 1932, the Nazis became the largest party with 230 seats and 37% of the vote. So he was not immediately appointed chancellor after the 1932 elections, despite being the leader of the largest party in their parliament. It took economic and political instability to worsen and the support of the conservative elite, the capitalist class, to convince Hindenburg to appoint Hitler. And Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. The Nazis were now in power. Okay. So it really was, we see, the capitalist class that plotted to, conspired to, and followed through to put Hitler in power. So this idea that somehow the communists are to blame for being like, fuck this, we hate this the entire time consistently, is really just capitalist propaganda to absolve themselves of accountability. So again, like we said at the beginning of the stream, is it true that maybe the capitalists could have teamed up with the more progressive elements of, that the communists could have teamed up with the more progressive elements of the capitalists to form a united front and defeat Hitler? Sure, the world also could be made of pudding. Anything is possible in these hypothetical worlds. But when we look at who directly is to blame for Hitler's rise to power, it is 100% the capitalist ruling class wanting to collaborate with him and work with him to profit. So that I think is really important. All right, so I have another source for us to look at here, which is Jacobin. I'm so sorry. But, it's not a bad, as far as bad sources go, this is our day of bad sources, okay? Now, since 1945, Germany's parliamentary parties have refused all alliances with the far right. And that, they're talking about this at a different date. When was this? 2020, so it's a little outdated what they're talking about as the current events framing. But what we actually want to talk about is the history. So we're going to skip this whole section about what was going on in 2020, and we're going to try to get to where they're talking about, it's Angela Merkel. This isn't super interesting. All right, we're going to talk about the history here. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party never managed to win a majority in a national election. Instead, it was helped into office by conservatives who were more terrified of real socialism than they were of Hitler's National Socialism, which is true. When capitalism starts to fall apart, as it inevitably does, people want to change. Communism looks good. Communism, especially, that meme that's like Little Caesar's pizza tastes good as hell when you don't have some bitch in your ear telling you it's gross or telling you it's nasty? That's it. Communism is good as hell. We don't have some American government propaganda in your ear telling you that it kills everybody. So when people see communism near them, they're like, oh my God, that's not like what I heard. It's working really, really well. We want to do that. That's inevitably what comes out of it. So somebody should make a version of that tweet that's for communism. Also, Little Caesars, didn't the owner of Little, like, okay, no good capitalist, obviously, but didn't the owner of Little Caesars, like, pay Rosa Parks rent for, like, the entirety of her life or something like that? Wasn't he like, I'm not a regular capitalist, I'm a cool capitalist? And you're like, you know what? If we're going to be stuck with it, it's the least you could do. All right, guy. Cool. Have they upped their game? Okay. So one of the things my partner and I first bonded over is child labor. So I got my first job when I was 14, and I've had a job every single day of my life since then. Like, that's how I got my first apartment in 17. Like, 14 is when I got my first job. My partner went up to me, got their first job at age 12, works illegally at Little Caesars as a sign twirler, because they had some stuff going on in their family life and they needed to support themselves at age 12. So they worked at Little Caesar, and they're like, yeah, by the time I was like 14 and legally able to work, I became like a manager at Little Caesars. So I just ate nothing but Little Caesars pizzas for like my entire teenage years, because that's like the only food I had access to, really. And so they are very, very pro Little Caesars pizza. I never ate it, but I hear it's very good. I don't know. They love it. They defend Little Caesars pizza. Oh, you're late. Hello, Danny Way. We're talking about Hitler. You worked for free at a local pizza shop in Montana as a pizza box assembler. You were a slave. Is that what you're saying? Lord Oxium? You were 11! You were a child slave! What? That's horrible! I hate capitalism so much. Yeah, lawsuit. Wow. Would be Montana, though. My grandma. I think I've told this story before. So my family's like very Californian, okay, on both sides. On my dad's side of the family, they came over during the Dust Bowl in the Okie migration. That's why I talk like this. They were farm workers, not like farm owners, but like farm workers. And they settled in the California Central Valley, originally in Kern County. And my great-grandfather was an artist. So he moved to LA to try to become an artist. He's a really cool illustrator. And it didn't work. He even went to Chicago to try to go to art school in Chicago, but the economy just tanked. So then he came back to California. And my great-grandmother was a local model for the Sears store in Fresno. And so my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother got together, tried to be farm workers during like the Dust Bowl and shit, just slightly after the Dust Bowl, rather, in Kern County, and it didn't work. So my great-grandma was like, I'm moving back to Fresno to model, and my great-grandfather was like, well, I'm taking the kid and we're going to LA. So then they lived in Eagle Rock in LA, my grandma and her dad, and then they reunited, whatever, eventually. It's just like very, very interesting story. I don't know why I brought this up, but there was some reason we were talking about this. About the slavery and the capitalism. Ugh. Yeah, we're like all like poor people version of fashion, though. Like we're like aggressively working class. Oh, because my family's very Californian. Okay, this is about Montana, I swear. And then my mom's side of the family, they came out from the East Coast. My mom's dad is not from California, but my mom's mom has been in California, like going back generations as well. So we're all very aggressively Californian. Like our story is that of the settling and colonization of the West, right? We helped do that. It's not great. It is the story of white American settler colonization, though. My mom's mom moved to Montana and now has the audacity to complain about all of the Californians moving to Montana. And I'm like, babe, that's you. That's you. What are you talking about? And she will get so vitriolically angry about all of the Californians moving to Montana. It is so bizarro to watch happen because it's like she's forgotten that she is Californian. Like she's just gone in her head. She's like, no, not me. Not me. It started with me and my partner bonding over child labor. Well, and then the Montana story. So whatever. So we go see my grandma. I used to go see my grandma sometimes in Montana. And it's a trip and a half out there. I actually had to stop going because I was like, I can't hang with this politically. This is getting too kooky. There was like this truck, and it was like an American-made truck, and it had a giant sticker on the back that said, this truck was made with wrenches, not chopsticks. And I was like, what the fuck? And I saw it, and I was in the car with my mom and my grandmother, and I was like, what the fuck is this sticker? Like, holy shit, this is deranged. And my mom was like, what the fuck? And my grandma was like, isn't that cute? And I was like, this is not you. Like, when did you become this? Like, you moved to Montana and just, like, became a caricature of, like, every conservative white woman from Montana yelling about Californians moving there and just being casually racist about truck construction. Like, what is happening? It was so weird. Very, very, very bizarre. Yeah. Super, super weird. Anyway, we don't talk to grandma. So Montana, that makes sense that they would enslave an 11-year-old to build pizza boxes there is what I'm getting at. Very, very wild. Okay. So, anyway, back on to Hitler. What a weird stream today, guys. I'm so sorry. So, as the Jacobin is saying, the Nazi Party was helped into office by conservatives who were more terrified of real socialism than they were of Hitler's National Socialism. It's just nationalism. It's just fascism. Fascism requires nationalism to function. It's a whole thing. Surely none of them could have anticipated the depths of cruelty to which the Nazis would eventually stoop, but they had little problem with curtailing democracy and repressing the left if it guaranteed their hold on economic power. Hitler particles from Operation Paperclip Fallout. Yes, it's all related. It is all related. Historical analogies are necessarily oversimplified, and the AFD in the 2020, okay, again, they talked about that earlier. It's outdated for us now. It's not super relevant. Is light years away from the Nazi Party in 1930. Nevertheless, with Germany's parties of the left declining in the polls, blah, 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 blah. That was it. Okay, so basically what they're saying is that these strategies, though, that we see with the Nazi Party being supported by conservatives, we can see replicating again in current economic and political situations, right? The theme is the same. The capitalists would always rather side with fascists than with the left, than with communists, than with socialists. So this is really the thing we're trying to hammer home here and why we brought about this Jacobin article. All right. Next up, Bad Source Day, we have a Substack article written by a poli-sci student. So I'm just really leaning into it. Sorry. I'm so sorry, you guys. It does have a little citation in it, and it's short. All right. Oh, okay. We have a speech, an Otto Welles Parliament speech against the Enabling Act of March 23rd, 1933. No enabling act in the world gives you the power to exterminate ideas which are eternal and indestructible. In Weimar Germany's final multi-party election in March of 1933, the Nazi Party won 44% of the vote, giving them a clear plurality in the parliament. A plurality, but not an absolute majority. Was this a last shimmer of hope for the dying liberal democracy? Hardly. Its foundations had already been shattered and were built on thin ice from the very start. It may have been a multi-party election, but not a free election, even by the limited standards of liberal democratic institutions. So this guy is a Marxist. So, and he includes some sources here. So I wanted to give a non-Trotskyist Marxist perspective, even if it's just a regular dude. And so that's kind of what we ended up here. This is the people's sources. You know what? There's something there. Of course, it's microplastics. It's always you. Whenever I die laughing at a comment, it's always microplastics. Okay. It may have been a multi-party election, as we said, but not a free election. Only a week earlier, Hitler's first government convinced the aged President Hindenburg to pass the so-called Decree for the Protection of the German People, more commonly referred to as the Reichstag Fire Decree. After the Reichstag was set on fire on February 27th, the parliament there, the exact circumstances are still debated by historians to this day, but I'll go with the Nazis did it. Hitler's government fabricated evidence for a communist plot and demanded emergency powers. Hindenburg relented with little resistance. Article 1 of the Reichstag Fire decreed, all these articles of the Constitution are suspended. It is therefore permissible to restrict the rights of personal freedom, freedom of expression, including the freedom of the press, the freedom to organize and assemble, the privacy of postal, telegraphic, and telephone communications. Warrants for house searches, orders for confiscation, as well as restrictions on property are also permissible beyond the legal limits otherwise prescribed. So for anybody who's alive after 9/11, this is basically what happened immediately after that. All of these things came out, new laws that completely said that basically all of this was okay in the name of national security here in the United States. So we have this, and I'm pretty sure a lot of it's still in effect, if I remember correctly. So we've been living in this world post 9/11. The Nazis' enemies, the communists of the KPD, chief among them, became the first victims of the newborn fascist state of motion. First, they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I was not a communist. That famous poem about the Nazis, they literally did come for the communists first. Alive after 9/11, sorry. Sorry, if you were alive during 9/11. Yeah. We got some ghosts in the chat. Thank you. Sorry. It's a real loose stream today, guys. We're all over the place. We're real loosey-goosey. I was really thrown off of my streaming game since I lost the phone game this morning to 3 of the top players in the world on the phone game that I'm on. That really fucked me up. That really mentally did something to me. You were 5? You were -2? Yay. All right. So, despite winning a relatively impressive result, 12%, right? That's how many the communists won, how many seats. Despite their active persecution and slander as being subhuman terrorists, they would never actually be able to take their seats in parliament. They were arrested and they were sent to the very first concentration camp in Dachau. And then they had to flee the country, or in some cases, they were murdered outright by roving paramilitary gangs. The leader of the Communist Party, I believe, was arrested and then held for around 10 years or so, and then eventually killed. This was the new Germany the Nazis imagined for all the world to see, one of open terror against the working class and their representatives. This goes on and shows the election results. The KPD, those are the Nazis, those are the communists. The SPD, those are the more progressive capitalists, and this is the Nazis, the NSDAP. So the KPD had been removed by force. The National and Social Liberty Party, DVP, that's over here, and CSVD and DSTP were reduced to irrelevancy by the ballot. Full disclosure, I'm not even familiar with those parties. I don't even know what they represent. And the anti-Republican Old Right Alliance, the KSWR, they backed Hitler. Meanwhile, the Catholic Zentrum and their Bavarian electoral allies, this group, the ZVVP, were divided over their stance regarding Hitler. They hated the communists, as this person says, as much as any God-fearing German Christian. But the Nazi Party, they weren't friendly to Catholics, and they were certainly an enemy to the Republic. And finally, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the SPD, were defamed as November criminals, referring to their signing of the Versailles Treaty, and traitors to the people by the Nazis. They had every reason to suspect they were next on the chopping block right after the communists. All the Hitlerites needed was an excuse. Okay, so when the Democrats tell you that if only the communists had teamed up with the liberals, they could have defeated the Nazis. This is what they're referring to, this party, okay, the SPD. They were, again, more social democrats. They were more your Bernie Sanders, AOC types. They weren't socialists necessarily. Some people call them socialists. They weren't socialists. This is what they're talking about. But as we can see from the text we've read, Hitler's rise to power wasn't just like the commies didn't team up with the libs to say no. That's not really what happened. It was a conspiratorial effort by a number of capitalists within the ruling class to specifically put Hitler in a position of power because they thought they could profit from it. Quite clearly. So this is a weird thing people will throw out, but this is what they're talking about when they're talking that. Now, there was an environment in which the Enabling Act, a constitutional revision handing full dictatorial powers to Hitler, was introduced in the Reichstag on March 23rd. So they needed an absolute majority of votes, something they would not be able to reach even with their allies. They needed liberal support, especially the Catholic Zentrum, to give them a semblance of legality for this. And this guy says, let's look at what happened and what it says about liberalism in the face of fascist pressure. Spoilers, it's not a good look. Not good at all. See, this is why we threw in the Marxist student, because his analysis is correct and he does provide sources, you know. He is the people's source. Okay. So, okay, it's not great, though. All right. So this section he calls ineffective resistance, cowardly compliance, and terror. This would be like somebody trying to cite me as a source, I would say, right? This would be like, oh, I'm right, but you could probably, I think you should probably look for somebody a little more respectable than me on this subject to tell it to you. So this is how I feel about this guy. So comrade to comrade, I appreciate him. All right, so can I link it? Yeah, I can. I have to make a tiny URL because it doesn't let me, the setup I have with OBS, it won't let me copy and paste into the chat because the chat is like this fake mirrored window thing I created. I don't know. So I have to make it a tiny URL so I can type it for you. All right. So I would not recommend using a Substack as a source, but I would say to get a briefing on an analysis from somebody who has similar politics to you, this is a good place to start. And this guy does share his sources in it. All right. So that's what I got. I don't think I used Chatterino. I think what I did is I just created a new setup that's like a web page, and then it's a link to like the web client. I couldn't figure out Chatterino quickly enough in my allotted time before it's time to move on. So I just did this, and it worked pretty fast, but it's not great. So it goes without saying, all members of the NSDAP, the Nazi Party, enthusiastically voted for the Enabling Act to give Hitler full power. Hitler held his first ever speech in the parliament, for which he held such contempt. There were no dissenters, no holdouts, not even those who hesitated to grab power too soon. This had been the Nazis' goal from the very start, to hand dictatorial powers over to Hitler, dismantle the bourgeois republic, and unleash mass violence against their enemies. Even on the day of the vote, they were prepared for violence. At the beginning of the debate, armed members of the SA entered the chamber alongside Hitler, while the SS surrounded the building, sending a clear message to every man and woman in attendance: vote for the Enabling Act or face the consequences. The KSWR, an alliance of the anti-Republican Stahlhelm Parliamentary with the monopoly capitalist Alfred Hugenberg's German National People's Party, supported Hitler's dictatorship. So the capitalists supported him. And we talked about this in one of the earlier sources where we saw not only did they support him, they helped choose him and convince Hindenburg to appoint him as chancellor. Once the primary far-right organization in Germany, they had steadily been losing support to the Nazi movement. So this really reminds me of when Trump was getting really popular. At first, how the Republicans tried to fight it. And they were like, fuck it, we need to embrace it. And that even happened with the Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation used to be an anti-Trump Republican Party old guard. And then they actually fired their leadership who did not support Trump and then went all in on Trumpism because they saw that it had political utility for them. So this is similar. The primary far-right organization in Germany was on the way out. They were losing supporters in favor of the Nazi movement, and the Nazis knew that too. So Hugenberg, on the other hand, believed, that was the rich guy, that they would be a necessary and independent part of the new Germany once parliamentary institutions had been crushed. Surely the Nazis would not forget their old allies, right? He wouldn't last for more than 3 months in government before being forced to step down, though. So the Liberal Democrats, cowardly pragmatism. By 1933, the liberal parties in Germany had disintegrated. Once able to boast results in the double digits, they were barely holding on with 1% of the vote and a handful of deputies. Where had those voters gone? To the Nazis, of course. Their position on the Enabling Act wouldn't sway the vote, but maybe there could be something more important than that: principles. Together with the Zentrum and the SPD, that's more of the Democratic Socialists, the liberal parties actually believed in the institutions of the bourgeois republic. Surely this would guide their behavior. Surely they wouldn't all vote for abolishing the republic, right? Okay, I'll drop the act. All deputies of the DVP, the DSTP, and the CSVD voted for the Enabling Act. Among them, Theodor Heuss, the first president of West Germany. Why? Officially, they argued that they felt like the situation in Germany demanded firm leadership. It was in the interest of the people in the fatherland. They sucked up to Hitler. Internally, they feared that an illegal dictatorship would be more brutal, likely even to them, so maybe it was better to just hand it to the Nazis and hope they would be constrained by the law. History proved them wrong. The Catholics, fear and loathing. The votes for the Zentrum were decisive for the Nazis to reach a supermajority, so naturally backroom talks were held trying to sway their leaders. Ludwig Kaas, the only recently elected as party leader, shared the anti-Republican sentiments of the Nazis. The majority of the Zentrum's Reichstag deputies, represented by the failed and loathed former Chancellor Brüning, were less sure about such a voting alliance. Hitler had personally promised them all kinds of assurances, both for the Catholic Church and the Republican institutions, while focusing on the necessary struggle against the communist menace. Critically, Hitler hesitated to put these promises into writing, and when the day of the vote came, he rebuffed their urgent demands to do so. The message was clear: if they didn't vote for him, they would see the consequences. And vote they did. Every member of the Zentrum and the BVP voted for the Enabling Act, giving the Nazis a supermajority to change the constitution. Fritz Bad, Reichstag deputy of the SPD, later recalled in his memoirs, if the entire center had not been forced by physical threat to vote for this Enabling Act, there would not have been a majority in this Reichstag either. I remember that members of the Center Party came to me crying after the vote and said they were convinced that they would have been murdered if they had not voted for the Enabling Act. And with that, they had voted for Hitler's dictatorship either by threat of violence or false hopes, and the Republic was dead. The Social Democrats, hopeless resistance. When Otto Wels, party leader of the SPD, ascended the podium, it was already clear that the Nazis had won their absolute majority. The cause was lost. The SPD had often and consistently rejected the idea of defending the Weimar Republic by force. This is, again, it's like you're bringing words to a gunfight. And at the latest, by July 1932, they had lost that ability with the illegal dissolution of their Prussian state government. They had resolved to fight them in institutions, with only auxiliary help from their paramilitary Iron Front alliance, and it failed. But Wels still ascended the podium and declared that the Social Democratic Party would vote against the Enabling Act. There were 94 votes, more than 30 of their seats remained empty due to either persecution or flight, but they would not go to the Nazis. Wels famously stated, "Our freedom and life can be taken, but not our honor." The Social Democrats would soon be persecuted, banned, beaten, exiled, and murdered all over Germany. Once the votes were cast, furious applause broke out among the deputies of the Nazi Party and the SA thugs in the hall, and they all began singing the National Socialist unofficial anthem, the Horst Wessel song. The Communists, meanwhile. After the Reichstag fire, the Communist Party of Germany, KPD, was banned, and its leading members declared enemies of the state. Naturally, they had no chance to cast their vote against the Enabling Act. So they were already gone by this point, right? Some of their members, like the terminally ill Clara Zetkin, a heroine of the German feminist movement, had already made their way to the Soviet Union to escape Nazi terror. Others, like the party's leader Ernst Thälmann, had no such luck and had already been arrested by the Nazi regime. This is the guy I told you guys, I'm pretty sure he was arrested and held for 10 years and then murdered. They would be taken to the first concentration camp in Dachau, where they were to spend their years in gruesome conditions until their freedom or murder. Oh yeah, Thälmann was executed in 1944 on Hitler's orders, so it was 11 years. The communists had been the first victims of Nazi terror, and despite tactical failures, its most principled enemies. They were the first, but they would not be the last. Not even close. Why liberalism can't beat fascism. So what is there to learn from this tragedy? There are many concrete lessons, like the weakness of liberals towards fascism, the ineffectiveness of institutional boundaries, and the mistake of tactical alliances with fascists. But this is the most important one. Liberals will find an excuse to support fascism if the movement is powerful enough. If they're uniformed murderers, yes, are intimidating enough. If their seemingly reasonable concessions are enticing enough. In short, liberals will support fascism when it is convenient, when it is the easier way. At a time when fascism is on the rise at an alarming rate, and the world's prime monopoly capitalists are cheering them on with a salute to Hitler, we shouldn't be surprised when liberals show their true face. Historically, the only section of society that showed genuine resilience to fascism were those of the organized working class and their leadership. The vast majority of class-conscious workers didn't vote for Hitler in the elections, and when the time came, their leaders rejected his dictatorship. Many of them paid for it with their lives. Today's working class does not need feckless liberals who will bow to fascism at the first signs of resistance. Instead, we need organization of the working class for the working class. Otherwise, it is only a question of time before the enabling acts of our time will be passed. The terror is already here. So, the thing I liked about this is talking about the difference between the Social Democrats and the Communists, both who were opposed to Hitler. And this is what the liberals are trying to say, like, the Communists didn't team up with the Social Democrats. First of all, the liberals are inaccurately describing themselves as Social Democrats. We know that the liberals in the United States today are not Social Democrats. They are not. We do have Social Democrats. You know, that's our Zoran Mamdani. That's our AOC, I guess, and Bernie Sanders, right? You know, maybe there are Social Democrats of the day. Maybe, if we're being generous with them, right? And I just want to say, I think that if any of those three people were like, we are standing up to Donald Trump and we want the communists to back us, I've done enough work in communist parties that I think we would back them. I think we would back them if they actually were going to take a stand against this. You know, out here in California, we have left unity. We even unify with the Green Party in our electoral front. We do a Lenin model of electoral engagement. That's not our only form of politics, obviously. We engage on the electoral model of Lenin, which basically says there's an opportunity to reach the masses and show them the shortcomings of the capitalist system. But for our electoral stuff, we build alliance all the time with the Green Party, with other left-wing political parties, you know, not in an electoral sphere, in more activist spheres and resisting spheres. We have alliances with even Trotskyists, even though we're not Trotskyists. So this idea that originally kind of spawned this whole conversation that somebody wanted to have, where they're like, well, the Democrats keep telling me that it was the communists' fault for not teaming up with the Social Democrats to defeat Hitler. It's flawed for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Social Democrats never really had a plan in Germany to defeat Hitler. They thought strongly worded letters were going to do it. It didn't. By the time they actually did take a clear stance and they were like, we're not voting for this, the communists had already been killed or captured or run out of town. Communism had already been made illegal. And, you know, in terms of how that relates to a United States parallel, our social democrats aren't doing anything to try to stand up to Donald Trump. Zohran Mamdani went to Trump's office and sat with him, and they had a buddy-buddy conversation, and he changed his tune on how he felt about Donald Trump pretty quickly. And fourth of all, the idea that we would not back, as communists, social democrats if they were taking a firm stance against fascism, I think that's simply ludicrous. I think most communist orgs would. We work with people who have different values than us all the time. We work with labor unions, right? If you're in a communist org, you probably work with labor unions. People in labor unions have bizarre fucking politics. There are people who are super conservative in labor unions, but you still work with them on things that benefit the workers in those unions, right? So this idea that the pesky communists are unwilling to compromise, it's just not true, right? It's not true. We are willing to compromise, but you have to be somebody who's going to fight beside us. And I think what we learned here is that the communists in Nazi Germany took one look at the social democrats and they were like, you have no fight in you. Like, you have strongly worded letters. You have voting. That's not enough fight to take this on. And this isn't going to work. Like, we can't align ourselves with that. That's no fight. And I think that's the same thing we see here in the United States. The left looks at the Bernie Sanders, the AOC, and the, Zohran Mamdanis, and we say, if you're the ones who are supposedly fighting, we're going to be led into nothingness. Like, we're going to be led into our own obliteration because you have no fight in you. You're not fighting this at all. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway since we started talking about this and talking about our different perspectives of this. The idea that the communists could have teamed up with the Social Democrats sooner to electorally defeat them, maybe. But Hitler was not somebody who was ever going to be electorally defeated, right? The elections weren't even fair at this point. They were done by threat of coercion and gunshots, right? So this idea that you could have voted harder altogether and it would have saved the day showcases exactly why the communists did not side with the Social Democrats. And again, the Social Democrats were even far more progressive than the Democratic Party here in the United States is. The Democratic Party were the liberals who just ultimately were like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. Right now I'm not reading. Right now I'm just talking. But we're reading a few different texts today. None of them are very, very good, but it's about, Hitler and the role of the Social Democrats and the liberals in his rise to power. So I think it's a weird framing, to be perfectly honest, because there was no world where what the Social Democrats planned to just vote harder would have saved the day. By their own admission, by the people who were crying and they were like, oh, they were just going to shoot us if we didn't vote yes, right? Hydrate, sorry. And stretch. And also worth noting, the Democrats in the United States today are not the Social Democrats. They're the liberals who capitulated fully. Okay, we're doing it all. Stretching. Oh, I just cracked my back. Posture check. Oof. And another hydrate. Yeah, it's deliberate framing to say it's all the commies' fault, right? Because we're the principled ones. And they're like, why wouldn't you just capitulate to us? And then together we could all capitulate to fascism. You're like, what? Girl, why don't you capitulate to us for a change? We can maybe fix this. We've got plans, which is wild. So, we have some more mid sources to look at today. Lola's not here yet, so we're chilling. The next, what's really funny about my sources today? I'm like, oh God, these are horrible sources. This is all I could find in the time period I had allowed. I think this would be good research for the average American. The average American is like, I learned a lot, and to me, I'm like, oh, this is so garbage, these sources. I'm so sorry, guys. Which isn't to say that some of the things they're saying aren't right, but they're not super, they don't have like credibility behind them, institutional credibility. And I do usually try to find something with some amount of institutional credibility. So we've got a Medium article. Sorry, I'm so sorry. From Lucas Unger. The day all the liberals voted for Hitler. Oh, this is the poli-sci student. I looked all these people up. This one's the poli-sci student. The other one was a historian, but like a not like a well-known historian, like a bachelor's degree historian guy. This is the poli-sci student. Sorry. All right. So, It is true there's no place for these perspectives in mass media. Usually what I try to do is find areas in mass media that have the fact that we want and be like, this is the fact we want, and now we do the analysis, which is a little better. Yeah. So, oh no, we already looked at this one. Okay, yeah, this must be, okay, we already looked at this guy. Sorry. I found 2 different places with the same guy. That's what happened. He was the same guy. He is a historian and poli-sci student. He's the same guy. All right. I remember. He's on Twitter. You guys can find him on Twitter. I did not find him on Twitter. Oh, but I found him afterwards and was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. This guy. Comrade Medium Substack. So, all right. Well, then we have this, how the left enabled fascism. So this is the perspective that the Democrats want to give you. All right. So I thought we'd read this just so we know. I'm so sorry. I'm not like browsing the web enough for that to be relevant in my life. I'm so sorry. Why do Marxists and eccentric political women have piercings or dyed hair? First time chat. We usually, okay, well, I don't consider, you're going to like this one even more. I'm not even a woman. I'm one of them, they, thems. Oh my God. They're going to cry about it or something. But the reason is that we reject social convention. It's very, very simple. When you tell us this is the way the world is, and we look at it and we go, this is kind of bullshit. Why? This doesn't make sense. It leads us to have a different way of interacting with the world, right? Just because something's presented as socially conventional doesn't mean we're necessarily going to accept it as true. And that causes us to want to kind of forge our own path, right? Or challenge that. So, yeah, as for the appearance, it's like, well, I'm 40 years old, right? When I have a normal job, like a jobby job, as I call it, that has a dress code, of course I'm going to adhere to the dress code because I need a job. But if I don't, there's no reason I can't dye my hair silly colors or have facial piercings if I want, right? So why wouldn't I? That's just social convention. That's a made up thing you guys came up with that doesn't actually mean anything. You guys just made that up. I don't care about that. I don't care about what some random person made up and told me had to happen. It's the same thing with politics, right? So much about American politics and capitalism revolves around like a web of lies, right? Like we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on propaganda every single year. And when you look into it, it's the same thing. You're like, well, what do you mean I'm supposed to fucking hate China? And you look and you're like, this is a lot of shit you guys made up. This isn't even real. I'm supposed to hate China because you guys made some shit up? No, I don't fuck with that. So it's kind of the same thing. It's the same ideology, right? So, you know, you guys are just following some shit you made up for no reason, like it's real, and we don't have time for that. Right, basically. Why? Like, why? Why do that? Why let people lie to you about how things are supposed to be? Seems weird. Right? I'm 39. People get mad because I keep saying I'm 40, but I'm technically 39. My birthday's in August. Sorry. I just kind of round up. Yeah. This is funny. Tattoos and piercings mean they're over 18. That pisses them off. That's really funny, Ghost Pain. Okay, so let's look at what the right-wing position is on this, okay? The SDP used a right-wing gang to murder revolutionaries, and libs still think that the communists would team up with the SDP. The leader of the left, adored for his authenticity and destined for cult status, saw himself as a fighter for radical change. So his transformed party was the biggest of its kind in Europe and bursting with youthful vigor. On the other side of the political spectrum lay the far right and its sinisterly absurd demagogues, thugs, and ideological lunacies. Naturally, the leader of the left regarded these people with contempt and viewed his party as the only authentic resistance to them. For strategic reasons, however, he was willing to help them achieve a key part of their dream, which he shared. The dream was to break the loathsome old liberal order. Such a break, reasoned the leader, would create conditions under which the left would sweep to power and transform the country for the better. And similarities to Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are far from coincidental, but the leader in question is Ernst Thälmann, chief of the German Communist Party, the KPD, in the final years of the Weimar Republic. Thälmann is a tragic and disastrous figure. Again, this is a right-wing perspective on this, okay? Not even a right-wing necessarily, but like a liberal capitalist perspective on this. Dogmatic, passionate, stubborn, and stupid, the former Hamburg dock worker divided the left and became one of the right's first victims. So this is really what they're telling you, right? This is when they're like, these are the stupid communists who didn't just team up with us to stop Hitler. And again, we just saw from everything we went through, that would not have stopped Hitler. Hitler was not like, vote me in, guys. If not, oh well. Like, that was never his policy. So, whatever. So let's see. Within weeks of Hitler's takeover in 1933, he, along with thousands of other communists, was arrested and tortured. Unlike many of them, he survived in prison for 11 years before being murdered on Hitler's orders in 1944. After the war, the leaders of the communist East Germany built a personality cult around Thalmann, erecting statues and naming streets, a Berlin park, and a metro station after him. The cult depicted him as the bravest and noblest of working-class heroes, Germany's supreme anti-fascist martyr. That he had also been one of the Nazi regime's unwitting enablers was erased. And again, though, unwitting enablers. This is literally just means he didn't capitulate, right? And this is how it's being framed. History never repeats itself exactly, and there are obvious and big differences between conditions and politics in Britain now and those of Germany in the run-up to Nazi dictatorship. But there are a few uncomfortable parallels. This is related to England. We're just going to skip that. In the 1930s, fear of Bolshevism persuaded many middle-class Germans to support Hitler and led the Catholic Church to throw in its lot with fascism in Italy, Spain, and elsewhere. These days, fear of Corbyn buttresses the worst Tory government in living memory. Again, that's related just to what they have going on in England. We're going to skip ahead for that. Social fascism was the communist term for social democrats, and it helped pave the way to catastrophe. But as we saw, it really wasn't, because ultimately, while they did stand up, their method of standing up was words. As we mentioned, they brought words to a gunfight. In the words of Theodore Draper, the American former communist fellow traveler who turned against the party and became a historian, quote, the so-called theory of social fascism and the practice based on it constituted one of the chief factors contributing to the victory of German fascism in January 1933. I will say, though, again, all of this discounts the fact that it was the communists who defeated the Nazis, right? It was the USSR who defeated the Nazis, and it's specifically, them who was able to do this because they had a hardline stance against it. Right? So if the USSR had not existed, people always say we'd be speaking German right now, right? Because we would see that the Social Democrats were still feckless and weak in the face of this. Yeah, you don't write a whole book in prison about how you want to eradicate people just to give up on an election. Exactly. So all of this is based around this false premise, which is basically the same thing that the communists were seeing the Social Democrats do in the moment at the time. They were like, you think these institutions are going to save you. They are not going to save you. And this is not gonna work. And then ultimately what happened is the institutions did not save them, and it did not work. And somehow the communists are getting blamed for knowing that, for being right early, for seeing that in advance and knowing that was going to happen. The theory developed in the early 1920s, favored by Stalin and established as communist orthodoxy by 1928, held that reformist social democracy was the enemy of the proletariat. Worse than fascism, that's not accurate, obviously, because it created false consciousness and made revolution, the party's overriding goal, less likely. Again, that's not really how social fascism is described as a theory, or as an idea. But okay, this is what they're going with. This notion derived from the left's misunderstanding of the dark forces about to overwhelm it. Thalmann and the KPD regarded fascists and Nazis as products and tools of capitalism. That is correct. Since social democrats were also capitalists, that is correct. It followed that social democracy, fascism, and Nazism were simply different facets of the same oppression. That is correct. Capitalism. To further the dream of a Soviet Germany, the party was willing to help the Nazis destroy democracy. That is not what happened. Thinking it could beat the Nazis easily in the aftermath. That is also not what happened. Unlike the modern labor left, the KPD's antipathy to their center-left rivals derived in part from memories of a recent crime against them. In January 1919, after Germany's defeat in the First World War and the fall of the Kaiser, the new Social Democratic Party, the Social Democrats, government led by Friedrich Ebert, used the far-right Freikorps militias to help suppress the Spartacist uprising led by the KPD founders Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. This is what somebody else was talking about earlier in the chat. In the process, Freikorps men tortured and murdered Luxemburg and Liebknecht. Okay, so just take a second here. This is the history that is missing from these analysis as well. The Social Democrats used far-right militias to torture and murder Rosa Luxemburg, and they thought the communists were going to team up with them. So what's really interesting here is that they were apprehensive to use force against the fascists, but they were thrilled to use force against the communists in the past, right? Which is wild. Absolutely wild. Right? The communists show up and they're like, kill them. Fascists show up, they're like, oh my God, our institutions will protect us, guys. Don't even worry. Exactly like what we see Democrats doing here today. But again, Democrats aren't even the social democrats in this situation. They are just the capitalist liberal class that we talked about earlier, who immediately capitulated to everything that the liberals wanted. So I'm trying to think of an example. Who's like one of the, maybe we'll say Gloria La Riva. She's pretty well liked. Everybody likes Gloria La Riva, right? There was that one claim she was transphobic for something on an Instagram post, but that ended up not being real. So like that's everybody likes her though, like regardless of your position, right? She's pretty universally beloved. Imagine Zoran Mamdani hires the NYPD to torture Gloria La Riva to death, and then is like, why won't the communists be friends with me in the United States? That would be that situation. Like, that is a crazy thing to happen. That is insane, right? So that would be the equivalent. And if you guys don't know Gloria La Riva, I think she's very likable. I think everybody loves her. She does great work on Cuba. That's like her whole thing. She talks about Cuba a lot. So, let's see. And actually, fun fact, so you guys know PSL split from Workers' World Party, WWP. I remember when that split happened in 2004. I remember when it happened because I remember that I had been paying attention to Gloria La Riva because I'd been like, oh, this chick knows like a lot about Cuba at that time. And that's why I first noticed about this. That's a little bit of American Communist group org history that I was like, oh, that's weird. She's starting a new party because she was part of that. I remember that. Posture check. Yeah, I think it was, yeah. It was that split, and that's why everybody calls them Marxists today, but I don't know, the Marxiist thing seems silly to me. I don't really know. I want to know the history more of the FRSO, because I know the history of PSL because I remember that. Like, I was active in politics and organizing that when that happened. But I want to know the history of the FRSO, because I looked into that, and they've been around since the 1980s. So if anybody's familiar with the history of the FRSO, that's like before my time, I would love to hear more because I'm very, very interested in them. Okay. Can you guys see me? My internet cut out for a second. Am I still here? Not the IWW. Yeah. Okay. I get all the letters confused. You guys should know that about me. All the orgs, I get the letters very, very confused. Please don't trust me. Okay, good, still here. Okay. Don't trust me when I give you letters for an org. Not trustworthy. Also, if I ever tell you directions on how to get somewhere geographically, do not trust me. All right? I'm telling you guys, I'm telling you guys right up front what not to trust me on. All right, so this is what's wild, though, right? The Social Democrats literally had Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht murdered, right? So I wonder why. The communists weren't so eager to work with them. So in the first part of his Hitler biography, Ian Kershaw describes these killings as a symbolic sealing of the rift within the working class movements that throughout the Weimar Republic prevented any united front from being formed against the growing threat of National Socialism Nazis. By the late 1920s, the KPD had largely purged itself of Spartacus and become a Stalinist party. Be wary of anybody who calls anything Stalinist, right? That's very, very strange. Yeah, the acronyms are super, super hard for me too. And everything has R and C in it or W and W in it. I'm like, ugh. There's working someday, and then there's workers, and then there's the revolutionary, and I'm just like, oh god, it's so many. So not a skill set of mine. But yeah, anything that, remember, when people call things Stalinist, it really communicates a lack of understanding of the USSR. One, in its political structure, which was very, very collaborative at the time. And two, that Stalin was merely implementing Marxist-Leninism. I am of the belief that there's not really a Stalinist ideology. It's not like he introduced new core ideologies, like part of political philosophy into the structure the same way Lenin did. Lenin introduced a concrete number of like 4 new things. Usually I have them memorized off the top of my head, but last time I tried, I couldn't quite remember. But, right to self-determination for marginalized people is a big one. Vanguardism is another one. And there are, I think, 2 other ones. But, so Stalinism, to be like a Stalinist or a Stalinism, he's just doing Marxist-Leninism. So whenever people say that, you can kind of see they have a pro-capitalist bias, and they might be a little confused about what communism is. So I'm just going to put that up there. Thalmann took his instructions from Stalin, and his hatred of the SPD was essentially ideological. I don't know. Murdering Rosa Luxemburg might have had something to do with it. Like, ideological. They killed your buddies. Like, what? That's wild to me. With hindsight, his relaxed attitude to the threat of Hitler seemed astonishingly foolish. For example, as Russell Lemons shows in his 2013 book about Thalmann, Hitler's rival, when the Nazis made their electoral breakthrough in the Reichstag elections of 1930, winning 18% of the vote, Thalmann insisted that if Hitler came to power, he was sure to fail, and this would drive Nazi voters into the arms of the KPD. Foreshadowing the 2017 claim that Labour actually won the general election it lost, the KPD newspaper The Red Flag even hailed the KPD's defeat in that election as a victory on the grounds that communist voters were ardent revolutionaries. It was up 2.5% to a total of 13%. One communist vote has more weight than 10 to 20 nationalist socialist votes combined. And again, this communicates a lack of understanding of how communists engage in electoral politics. Communists do not think you can vote your way out of fascism, right? Which is also why when the Social Democrats were like, come on, join us for votes. They're like, votes aren't going to stop this guy. Like, votes are not going to stop this guy. So that's why when looking at it, they're like 13% of the population are ardent communists. That means they are aware that voting is not enough to stop this man. That's good, at least, that we have that going for us. And that's why he said one communist vote has more weight than 10 to 20 National Socialist votes combined. Because one communist knows what it takes to defeat Hitler more than 20 Social Democrats who have no clue what the fuck's going on, right? Or National Socialist votes combined. I guess that was for the Nazis too. I mean, that obviously, a little flawed, right? Because they had the institutional power of the state at the time. The Nazis had the institutional power of the state backing them. But at the same time, just this idea that it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Communist Party at this time is engaging in electoral politics. They know that voting's not going to take down Hitler. So, yeah. This is what's going on here. So this is why the position from the right is confused. It does not really understand how communism works or Marxism works. All right, so along the way, Thalman made any number of tactical blunders, it says. In 1925, for example, against the advice of Bolshevik leader Grigory Zinoviev, the KPD leadership refused to stand Thalman down in the second round of the German presidential election. The split took enough votes away from the center candidate Wilhelm Marx to give the First World War general Paul von Hindenburg a narrow victory. In 1933, Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor, then signed the decrees enabling the Nazi terror against the left after the Reichstag fire. Again, though, Hindenburg was pressured by the capitalist class to do this, the moneyed class to do this, right? So the idea that the centrist candidate Wilhelm Marx would not have been similarly pressured by the capitalist class to do that, that's pure speculation. We have no reason to believe that wouldn't have happened either way. As the Nazi menace intensified in the early 1930s, Thalman continued to be sanguine. As late as February 1932, he was arguing that Hitler must come to power first, and the requirements for a revolutionary crisis will arrive more quickly. In November 1932, just 3 months before Hitler's takeover, the KPD and Nazis even worked together in the Berlin transport workers' strike. Let's see if they get into this here. Oh no, they're just talking about Brexit. They're talking about this. Okay, so then they're comparing it basically back to England, what's going on here in England, which isn't super relevant to our conversation. And then we jump in here. Only in February 1933, by which time the battle was already lost, did Thalman finally grasp the situation and propose a united front with the SPD and the Free and Christian trade unions under his own leadership to prepare for a general strike to bring down the new regime. So again, though, this is him being like, your guys' solutions aren't going to work. Like, we need something more tangible. And when the Nazis started rounding up leftists, Thalman escaped, but his hiding place in Berlin was revealed by a tortured comrade, and he was arrested on March 3rd and taken to prison. So he was shot in the courtyard of the camp crematorium, and his body was burned inside in August of 1944. Lemons argues that Thalman went to his grave believing that the SPD represented the forces of social fascism and was no better than Hitler's party. That and his subservience to Stalin meant Thalman failed his people in his greatest hour of need. The KPD did nothing to stop the Nazi seizure of power. They had welcomed it as what they considered to be the dying breath of German imperialism. So I want to take a second to talk about this. Like, what they're talking about here is the idea of accelerationism, right? This idea that Thalman was like, no, we need the Nazis to come to power because then it'll be so bad, everyone will be ready for revolution. Now, a lot of you guys remember how communists talked about Donald Trump, and they were accused of being accelerationists here, and their positions were painted the same way. Everyone was like, oh, these communists are accelerationists. They want Donald Trump to win. So everybody is driven to a crisis that will lead to communist revolution sooner. And this was actually not what I saw communists saying, who were getting painted this way. So similarly, this doesn't feel representative of what Thalman would actually say, right, as a Marxist-Leninist, Stalinist, as a Marxist-Leninist. It seems like a misunderstanding of the Marxist position on revolution, right? And a lot of people imagine that, again, Marxist-Leninists imagine ourselves to be revolutionaries. And while some might, the majority of us more imagine ourselves to be vanguard party leaders, educating the masses about what the future will look like post-capitalism and how to build it, based on history and based on our understanding of political theory and political philosophy. So what is far more likely is the actual Marxist position, which would be, look, Social Democrats are backing the exact same system of violence and harm that Nazis are. They're two different ends of the of the spectrum, but for the same ideology, which is correct, capitalism, right? Social Democrats were the super, super friendly, nice capitalism, and the Nazis were the super mask off, evil, full fucked capitalism. Even the super, super nice version of capitalism had communists murdered, right? We saw that, had workers murdered. So when looking at this, you're like, these are two different ends of the spectrum for the same force of evil in the world. What's more likely is Thalmann was looking at this and saying, at least when Hitler is in power, he is mask off and people have no choice. They can't ignore it. They can't ignore it anymore. That doesn't mean that's good. That doesn't mean that's what people want. And that's really the way I saw a lot of communists talking about Donald Trump, right? They would look and be like, well, Donald Trump is just doing out in the open what people were doing quietly behind closed doors all along. Now, with Hitler, obviously, is very, very different because people were not doing the Holocaust behind closed doors in Germany, right? They were very, very oppressive. They were very racist. They were all of these things. But that is most likely the ideology that Thalmann is intentionally misrepresenting to make a point, somehow condemning communists for all of this. But when you look at it, really, the thing that gets me is that there's still no accountability taken for what actually allowed fascism to thrive in Nazi Germany, leading up to Nazi Germany, before pre-Nazi Germany, right? You have capitalists pressuring Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor. Sorry. You have the actual centrists, Hindenburg, appointing Hitler as chancellor. You have all of the actual liberals, who would be the Democrats, not the Social Democrats today, voting in favor of giving Hitler absolute power because they were too afraid not to. And then you have the Social Democrats showing up with words to a gunfight after having completely divided themselves from the actual left. You have these five people, the Social Democrats, their role, questionable, right? They did take a stand in Parliament, but that was about it. These are the four people, certainly, who really colluded to allow the rise of fascism. You have the fifth contingent, which is the Social Democrats, which arguably they took a stand when it was a little too late, right? How are the communists getting blamed for this at all? How are the communists who identified what was happening from the jump saying voting is not going to stop this from happening? You guys, frankly, are not to be trusted. You've murdered us in the past. This is fucked. And inevitably what's going to happen is, if Hitler gets elected, it's going to show all of the shortcomings of this system for even allowing this to occur. And maybe then people will see that the only real answer is communism. That's not necessarily an endorsement of that. That's just a historical analysis, right? That's a material analysis of what's probably going to happen. That's not an endorsement. They didn't show up and endorse Hitler. They weren't the ones going to Hindenburg and being like, appoint him as chancellor. They weren't the ones who were working with the capitalists to try to give him power. They didn't show up and vote in favor in Parliament of Hitler's policies. How are they the ones getting blamed for the advance of Hitler? It's absolutely delusional. When you look at all of these different people that were involved in allowing fascism to spread in Nazi Germany, to claim that the communists were the reason out of all of this, that Hitler rose to power, the one group that steadfastly opposed Hitler the entire time, even to the extent that they opposed people taking a passive or milquetoast resistance stance against him, to turn this around and try to look like they were the ones actually secretly, if you think about it, endorsing him all along is absolutely bonkers. And it's the kind of doublespeak I think communists are used to in the United States. It has to do with that horseshoe theory thing where people want to claim communism is just as evil as Marxism, right? And it's like, no, these were the only people the entire time going, well, this is fucked and nobody's going to stop it. Nobody's ready to stop it except for us. When they look at their numbers and they're like, okay, cool, like 13% of us are ready. All right, that's pretty good numbers. Like that's positive, right? That's because they know nobody's going to help them. And when they did ultimately try to do a coalition thing, like, hey, you guys don't have a plan. I have a plan. We have a plan. Come together. Trade unions, Social Democrats, if you want to stop this guy, come together. We've got a plan. Everyone's like, well, not if you're in charge. And it's like, I'm sorry, what's the alternative? We let the people who murdered us 10 years ago be in charge? It's wild. It's absolutely bonkers. So, yeah, that's pretty kooky. That's what's going on there. These narratives really do help detract from the truth. Okay, so I have one more article for us to look at in our bad sources. Lola's not here yet. I don't think. Okay, that's okay. Lola's late. Yes, we got more time. All right. So This is a Trotskyist paper in our day of bad sources. We got a Trot paper. All right. Okay. Thank you, Ghost in the Shell. All right. So Autistic Baddie 3, you're new to communism. How does one get from capitalism to communism? So the idea is that there's a transition phase out of capitalism into communism, and there are a number of steps that will happen. I'm going to take a second really fast to pull this up. You're totally okay to ask questions in good faith. Yeah, that's totally fine. You know, don't be a weird fucking freak though. Like this other person in here being like, oh, it's an echo chamber, whimsical dreamer 87. It's not an echo chamber. But it's like, you're not sly, I guess. Like some of you people think that you're a lot more slick than you are. And you're like really passive aggressive and it's weird. So don't be surprised when people are confused by your bullshit, I guess, or like don't have time for it. You know what I mean? You're not fucking slick. You're not like, I was just asking a question. Like, oh my, like please, come on, we're not 12. Like, yeah, I was just asking a question, but what about Iran? I don't know. I was just asking a question. Like, are you serious right now? Like, we're not gonna suspend disbelief for 12 minutes to accommodate you. That's really, really silly. So, all right. So the person here asking though, how do you get here? I'm going to pull up ye old favorite Principles of Communism, and I'm going to review it really fast because it is good to know, like, what is the communist plan? What is our plan? And as revolutionary communists, like, we believe that you can't vote your way out of fascism. You can't vote your way out of capitalism. You can't vote your way into socialism. We don't believe that we are going to go out and do a revolution necessarily, but what we believe is that the crisis of capitalism is so inevitable that historically, based on what we've seen happen with revolution in the past, it will collapse into revolution probably one day. That's our assessment, right? And that's not saying that we're going to be the ones out doing it or that we're trying to create it or we're trying to speed it up necessarily. You know, just for all legal grounds being covered as well, because people will try to do that. They'll try to paint these Marxist-Leninists as being these violent revolutionaries. And at a time when the federal government has an enhanced eye on Marxist-Leninists, I think that's a really important distinction to make, and to make for your own protection as well. Like, knowing history and predicting the future doesn't make me evil, right? It means that I'm studying history and I understand through a Marxist lens, like a Marxist analysis, what's probably going to happen next, and we tend to be right. So that's, I think, a really important distinction. And that's the difference between us and anarchists, for example. Anarchists imagine themselves to be revolutionaries a lot of the time. We don't. We think that the masses are the revolutionaries. The masses will lead the revolution, probably. That will probably happen, inevitably, because capitalism is unbearable. That's just a prediction, right? So I think that's important to say. So, what happens after that? What happens after the masses are like, I can't handle this anymore, and they have a revolution? Our goal is that from the ashes of whatever that has been destroyed, that something better is built. That's our goal, is that something better is built. And what does that look like? So the goal of Marxist-Leninists is that we take control of the existing state apparatus, and it's used basically to build a more equitable world. But we understand the transition out of capitalism has to be slow, because there are many people who rely on institutions of capitalism to live. Disabled people, for example, rely on medical and healthcare systems. You know, we rely on that. So we also rely on things like agricultural systems that are in place, housing, infrastructure, roads, public transportation. We don't want those things to go away overnight. We don't want people to be stranded. So our goal is to utilize the existing structure of the state and transition out of a capitalist state slowly into a socialist state that is more equitable. And we know that this is going to take time. So the steps we think will probably happen, it'll be a little different everywhere, is that we'll limit what we call private property, but that's not just like the house you live in. We call that personal property. Private property can be best thought of as privatized property. So that means things that people own to make a profit off of. Like, they're privatizing everything, you know, like Reagan era privatization. Like that just means that corporations are buying things, things people need to live in order to make profits off of them. They're privatizing water, they're privatizing transportation, etc. They're privatizing property. That's business, that's homes. So we want to limit privatized property through systems including progressive taxation, heavy inheritance taxes, the abolition of inheritance through collateral lines like brothers, nephews, etc., and forced loans. Next, we want to gradually expropriate landowners, industrialists, like public transportation owners, ship owners, partly through competition by state industry and partly through direct compensation in the form of bonds, which basically means all the people who own land, who own factories, who own industries, who own transportation lines, whatever we need to make society run, we want to replace them. We want to replace them with state-owned apparatus, publicly owned apparatus. And what that's going to look like is we introduce our own government kind of competition. So like, all right, there's a housing developer in your area charging $3,000 for these brand new apartments they're building. Okay, we want to have the government create a public housing option that builds apartments in that same area. But guess what? They're free because housing is a human right. Right? So we become the competition state industry to them. Or maybe there's a really huge housing provider in your area and they're doing a good job, but they're just charging too much money because of the profit incentive. Okay, maybe we buy out shares of their company. So now it's under public control. Number 3 is the confiscation of all possessions of immigrants with an E. Those are people who leave the country. Those are people who flee, where they're like, I don't like this socialism stuff, I'm leaving. We're like, okay, that's fine. You can leave, but your stuff stays here because your stuff came from our work. And our rebels, people who don't like us, we're like, okay, if you leave, we keep your stuff and we share it equally for everybody. Number 4, the organization of labor or employment of workers on publicly owned land, in factories, in workshops, with competition among the workers being abolished, and with the factory owners, if they still exist, being obliged to pay the same high wages as those paid by the state. So basically saying, remember how we were like, well, we're going to start our own housing companies. We're going to start our own factories to compete with these privately owned ones. If you still have a privately owned factory, guess what? You have to pay your workers the same wages that we're paying. So if the government workers and these factories or whatever are making $50 an hour, that's what you have to pay if you have a private industry. Pay them $50 an hour, right? Next, we want an equal obligation on all members of society to work until such a time as private property has been completely abolished. Formation of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. So this basically means if you are able-bodied and able to work, not if you're elderly, not if you're disabled, not if you're young, but if you're able-bodied and an adult and able to work, you have to work. No more of these rich people spending months of the year off on private yachts partying while their workers toil away in their factories to make them the money to do that. No, if you are able-bodied and you're part of our society, you show up to work. You help share. You share in the work to make this society function with the rest of us. Nobody gets to opt out of doing what's fair and right, doing their fair share to help everybody out. Then we have a centralization of money and credit in the hands of the state through a national bank with state capital and the suppression of all private banks and bankers. No more of your credit card company charging you 30% interest rates. No more of shopping around for a car loan and getting charged 12, 15, 18%. Like, no, we're going to have fair banking. Oh, I think Lola might come. Might be here. 1 second. Hold on, guys. Fork screensaver. Oh, sorry, I'm back. I have real fork now. IRL. Yeah. We have a few minutes though. We'll just finish up with what we're doing, okay? Hi. Hello. Hi. Okay. Oh. Okay. So, next we have increasing the number of national factories, workshops, railroad ships, bringing new lands into cultivation and improvement, all in proportion to the growth of capital and labor force at the disposal of the nation. So, just building infrastructure, building what we need to build the things we need for a good life. Then we have education of all children from the moment they can leave their mother's care in national establishments at national cost. So free education for everybody. This is also important to bring women into the public sphere, though, and out of the household. So education and production together. Construction on public lands of, it says great palaces, but big buildings for communal dwellings for associated groups of citizens engaged in both industry and agriculture. So combining in their way of life the advantages of urban and rural conditions while avoiding the one-sidedness and drawbacks of each. So a lot of this has to do with rural poverty. How do we combat rural poverty? So when they say communal, it doesn't mean like, 20 people to a house or whatever. It means more communities, building communities that offer the same advantages that urban life has, like 15-minute walkable cities, whatever, in small communities placed in the rural areas. So people don't experience that rural poverty that usually occurs in differences between the rural area and the cities. Is there a difference between the process of converting to authoritarian left and liberal left? So authoritarian is not really a meaningful term. We don't really use that term that often. It doesn't really mean anything. And liberal left, I mean, that really is a meaningless kind of term as left. I guess that would be like left comms, right? But really, hold on, Fork's being weird. One sec. Fork, come here. No, you're stuck in here with me. Yeah, I know. He's horrible, huh? You want to run around and bark at things. Fork's got a lot of big feelings right now, everybody. But I guess the idea of like the left comm thing, liberal, left, center, right, you think more libertarian. That's what I was kind of thinking. They don't really have a plan based on everything I've read, and I was involved in that world for a long time. It's either a very utopian plan or it's not a firm plan. Marxist humanism. Yeah, we could talk about that. Were you the person who asked about it earlier, or was it Child of the Reach I thought asked about it maybe? Oh, libertarian guys? Oh, okay, maybe, yeah. We'll get back to it, sorry. Here is Principles of Communism, 1847. So left comm is more people who are like, well, I'm a communist, but I don't support the USSR. I'm a communist, but I don't support China. It's very interesting because it's like they want to conduct, and I used to be this way. When I was transitioning out of anarcho-communism into just Marxism, I'm a Marxist-Leninist today, there was a period of time where I called myself just a non-denominational Marxist. And that also has a lot to do with the org I was with for a while. That was kind of like the org I was with was like, we're just Marxists. But the idea is basically that you critique heavily communist projects that have existed. And while some critique is good to help you do better and build, and like self-critique is good, it was ultimately counterproductive. And I eventually reached a point where I was like, this is fucking bullshit. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to endlessly critique the only working examples of socialism we have in society. I don't think that there's utility in that, right? So that's kind of where I ended up changing. The compatible left, exactly. Comrade Slade, the compatible left, yes. And that's ultimately why I switched orgs, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. So yeah. And then we have, the construction of these areas that I think are really cool. And you can see China does this a lot. And then the destruction of unhealthy buildings in urban districts. Fork, no. She wants to go back to bed. Fork, come here. Let us finish. No, leave it. She's fighting with me right now. The dog is fighting with me. She's standing at the door looking at me like. Okay. So, then equal inheritance rights for children born in out of wedlock. That's not super relevant to us today. And concentration of the means of production in the hands of the nation. So these are the processes we think it'll happen. We say you can't do it all at once, obviously. It's going to take some time, but this is our goal. And then finally, when all capital, all production, all exchange have been brought together in the hands of the nation. This is why when people are like, state capitalism isn't socialism, literally the description from Engels from 1847 says that you bring together all capital, all production, all exchange in the hands of the nation. That is the first step. And also Lenin said state capitalism is the first stage of socialism. It is. Only then does Engels say private property will disappear of its own accord, money will become superfluous, and production will expand, and man so change that society will be able to slough off whatever its own economic habits may retain. All right. So the first step is always getting things in the hands of the nation. And at that point, it's not our goal to make private property disappear completely or money become superfluous, right? But we think it's inevitably going to happen once all of this is done. So these are our goals. These are our main goals here, right? Okay. I agree with this. What is to be done in Foundations of Leninism? Yes. Hamburger, I'm going to be so honest, I have no idea what you're talking about. You clarified the claim that CPUSA are libs. So I was in CPUSA, so I can actually talk about what microplastics are talking about here. So for a long time, CPUSA, it used to be more radical. And I think a lot of people, including me, we joined it because we liked the history of the CPUSA. But I will say they did change to have a more general Marxist idea. They weren't explicitly Marxist-Leninists. And they would do things that Marxist-Leninists would not do. Like they encouraged participation in elections by voting for Democrats. And there was a year I voted for Barack Obama and I was in CPUSA, and that's kind of what we were told to do. And I did not feel good about that or like that. So that was one of the things I was like, So, CPUSA, though, I will say to their credit, after last year, they announced that they were going to do a lot of changes internally. And they had been just kind of this non-denominational kind of general Marxist org. It made them kind of lose direction. So I know there are, Django recently said that she's a part of CPUSA. I have other mutuals who are in CPUSA. It looks like CPUSA is finally taking steps to change and be more effective in the United States. After last year's election, like I said, they released something. They were like, we're not supporting Democrats anymore. We're not doing that. We're switching some things up internally. Good. So if CPUSA is the org near you and it's the most accessible org to you, I don't want you to discourage you from joining it, because I am an org person. I think joining an org is good, and I would rather you join orgs I don't even agree with that are Marxist, like a Trotskyist org or even like DSA, before not joining an org at all. That is how much I believe in the power of orgs. So I don't want to discourage you from joining CPUSA if that is the org closest to you. Fork, come on. No. Be reasonable. Do you guys hear her? She's really putting it in all the work right now. She's like, I'm tortured. You joined FRSO today. Oh, cool. Okay, Fleckies. Yay. Awesome. So, I am an org person, full disclosure, but I would say if there's a Marxist-Leninist org near you, I would join that before I would join CPUSA, because they are not explicitly Marxist-Leninist. So I hope that makes sense. A free earlier fork. I just wanted to wait a few minutes. There's just commotion going on the property, and she can't be contained by fences. She figures out how to wiggle her way out of them. So I prefer when Lola's here and people are moving back and forth and stuff, that I just have her in a space I can see her. Hydrate. Okay. So we're going to finish up this Trotskyist piece on Hitler, and then we're going to be done for today. Yeah, William Z. Foster CPUSA is better than the rest of the history of CPUSA. I think that Chair Dog Fork says no borders. She really does. She really is an anarchist. I keep telling you guys this. Fork, come on. Why don't you go to your bed? Look, you got a cozy bed with a blanket. Go to your bed. She's looking at me like maybe. Go to bed. 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 Good girl. Good Fork. Good girl. She's being so good now. She went to her bed. So I'm in Peace and Freedom Party for electoral work. That's my electoral end that I do. Peace and Freedom. They're a coalition socialist org, but again, electoral is just one small part of socialist organizing. So I don't say the name of the org I'm with, because they're really good people, and I'm an internet troll goblin, basically, and I don't want them to get bad attention because of me. Like, they're really nice. They're mostly just like teachers and healthcare workers. And I have people do all sorts of horrible shit to me. I don't know if you know. People try to get me fired from my own job. People dox me. People try to dox my partners. Like people do wild shit to me. So I don't want to do anything that would compromise the org I'm with, basically. Their integrity, because they are very respectable people. And so I don't say that part. Because Peace and Freedom's electoral, that's easier. I can share that. I don't feel like that's really destructive. Yeah. But I will say, if you are looking for national Marxist-Leninist orgs, the two biggest ones are FRSO and PSL. People get a little eye rolly about PSL, but I can tell you I've worked with PSL in the capacity for the Vote Socialist campaign. They seem great to me. They seem delightful to me. I know that they recruit from liberal bases, and sometimes people think that's annoying. But what are you going to do? You got to recruit from somewhere, I guess. So that's kind of it. And FRSO, people love FRSO. They're a little bit smaller. But they're great. I've been out at actions with FRSO there before. I did recently the Hands Off Venezuela action. FRSO was there. I find them delightful as well. Never a bad experience with them. So those are the two biggest Marxist-Leninist orgs. And I will say, I think it's telling that PSL is getting a lot of national attention right now. Obviously, in June, they were issued that warning from the federal government, from the House of Representatives, who forced them to disclose. It was them and Chirla and Code Pink forced them to disclose all of their internal records to the federal government, including their donations. And the reason why that's relevant, if you've ever been in a Marxist org, you know you're all donating. So basically, the federal government forced PSL, Chirla, and Code Pink to turn over the names of all of their members. But they did it slyly by being like, everybody who's ever donated to you. Okay, well, these orgs are run on internal donations. If you join an org, be prepared for that. They will ask you for internal donations. They're usually really flexible about how much you can give. Okay, like, you give what you can. It's not super hardcore. But that basically meant that. So, and then also, I don't know if you guys saw Donald Trump just got on the news and tried to claim that PSL was not an organic movement in the United States and they were being paid by another country because their signs look too nice. I don't know if you guys saw that. So I think you're not going to catch me talking shit about the Marxist-Leninist orgs we have nationally with the biggest eyes on them. And that's the one right now that's getting the most heat. And so I'm not going to do that. But again, you know, that might not be the party for you. And that's totally okay. Right? So... I'm trying to see what else. The same way also I don't talk shit on Green Party. Like, you'll never catch me talking shit. Like, I defend Green Party. They're not even like outright Marxist, but they're like eco-socialist. Vote Socialist has a thing where I volunteer for their peace and freedom. We're doing a coalition thing with Green Party as well. It's not the party for me, Green Party, but I'm not going to talk shit about the Green Party. You know what I mean? So I think that's important. Yeah, those yellow signs must have come from Russia. Yeah. So, you know, and again, I think it's important too, as you move through the world, you might find parties that are not for you. I would encourage you to think about the utility of publicly shit-talking Marxist-Leninist parties. There are only two that I will publicly say bad things about. One, because I'm pretty sure... the fucking balloons. One, because I think that they are, like, quite literally going down Nazi territory, and that's the ACP, and I'm like, oh, fuck, those guys are freaks. And the other, because it's not even a Marxist org, it's a cult, and it's Bobovakian, and I think you all need to know that's a cult, not a Marxist org. Those are the only two I'll say bad things about. Every other socialist org, even Trotskyist orgs, like, I go out to things, Trotskyist orgs are out. Trotskyist orgs are out, right? Like, I'm not going to talk shit about a Trotskyist org right now, even though I'm not a Trotskyist, and I'll tell you guys why I don't agree with Trotskyists all the time, right? So... balloon time. Green Party, Hamburger, that's the United States Eco-Socialist Party. They're not explicitly Marxist, and they have an emphasis on the like environments. But they're progressive. The second one was the Bobovakian one. I can never remember the letters. Hold on, let me look. Bobovakian is RCP. So that's a cult. It's not a real communist party. RCP. Is Revcom is them too, right? I'm like, or is Revcom RCA? Yeah, that's Revcom, right? They're Revcom. Right? Yes, right? Okay. The fucking letters. The letters. Anything related to LaRouche as well. Yes, if you find one related to LaRouche, I will talk shit about that as well. That is also a cult. So I'm going to say PSL, FRSO are the two biggest in the country. They're probably going to be one of those near you, but there might also be a local one. I'll call you Angel. Okay, I'm sorry. Angel. Yes. Yeah, ACP put out a Dugan thing. I mean, it's just, we don't fuck with them. Revcom is a cult. Stay back. Yes. Yes. Stay away from LaRouche. Correct. But other than that, yeah, like I said, I'm not even, when I go out to actions even, if I see the Revcoms leading a little, like if they're leading a chant, you know what I do? So if a Revcom is leading a chant and I have a megaphone, I'll do the callbacks on their chants to be like, left unity, I see you. You know, we don't have the same goals and interests, but we both fucking hate ICE, so let's go, you know? So, yeah. All right, so back on our last thing, which is a Trots paper, because I believe in left unity. Right? Patting myself on the back. And fuck Zizek. Yeah, okay. How Hitler came to power. This is from Socialist Party, formerly Militant. And this is a UK Trot Trot.org, just so you know, but we're going to talk about it. This was the one I mentioned earlier. It says a lot of good things about Trotsky. It's a Trot.org, so just keep that in mind as we go. Our day of bad sources. Now, towards the end of World War I, Germany was a country ruined. Also, Trotsky had some good stuff. Trotsky had some bangers. You know, Trotskyism, a little different. So, all right, okay. Towards the end of World War I, Germany was a country in ruin. Over 1.5 million Germans had died. An economic blockade meant conditions for workers in the city were deteriorating. Opposition to the war rapidly increased. Ben Robinson looks at what led to Hitler's rise to power 75 years ago. The German Social Democratic Party, the SPD, the Social Democrats, built by workers, had close links to the trade unions and enormous electoral loyalty. Having been regarded as the leading socialist party in the world, in August 1914, the SPD leaders finally abandoned opposition to capitalism and voted to support the First World War and the imperialist ambitions of the ruling class. So this is what I mean. Trot papers will be good at assessing history a lot of the time. They're good at critiquing capitalism. We agree in our critiques of capitalism. Where we differ is in our ideas for solutions and moving forward, right? So that's for me as a Marxist-Leninist. Huge numbers of casualties at the front and worsened exploitation and hardships in the factories. This was the situation for workers on all sides and led to a growth in anti-war sentiment. 10,000 workers marched in Berlin in 1916, demanding down with war, down with the government. In Russia in 1917, these conditions spurred the workers and poor to a revolution and to the establishment of a socialist government. The new Russian Soviet government's declarations for peace and the reality of the abolition of capitalism offered massive hope to the workers across the world. And this is why I don't talk shit about socialist projects. A series of revolutionary waves swept Europe. In November 1918, workers' councils were created throughout Germany, and the Kaiser's empire collapsed, leaving the councils briefly effectively holding power in many cities and towns. The German working class and large sections of the middle class looked to a socialist alternative, but there was no clarity on how concretely to achieve this, Marxist-Leninism, and no party with an experienced leadership capable of addressing the situation and putting forward a correct strategy for socialism. Vanguard Party. The Young Communist Party, KPD, inspired by the example of the Russian Bolsheviks, contained many committed socialists, but at that time was relatively small. Still seen by many as a party for the workers, the Social Democrat Party, their leadership was unable to maintain the rule of the capitalist class by a mixture of concessions and repression. So they were already capitulating majorly to the capitalists. Unlike the Bolsheviks in Russia, the SPD leaders worked to save capitalism. So the Social Democrats were trying to fix capitalism. In putting down the revolutionary movement, the Social Democrat leaders even utilized the Freikorps, which we talked about, violent nationalist paramilitaries, many of whom would later serve fascism. Their many victims included Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, two courageously revolutionary leaders. This led to the SPD rapidly losing support. Its 1919 vote of 11.5 million votes fell to 5.6 million 18 months later, and eventually the KPD gained more mass support. It's going to be weird about Stalin. Just so everybody know. It's a Trot.org. It's going to be weird about Stalin, okay? It's going to be weird. I'm so sorry. In 1923, despite commanding majority support within the working class, the KPD missed an opportunity to overthrow capitalism in Germany. A brief period of stability for German capitalism followed in the mid-1920s. Struggles for better wages and conditions increased, but the immediacy and the need to abolish capitalism subsided amongst the masses. Internationally, the post-war revolutionary period had ended. Soviet Russia was isolated in a sea of hostile capitalist states with no immediate prospect of the situation changing. The defeat of the various struggles of the international working class made an impact on the Russian masses, many of whom were disheartened and weakened by hardship and the loss of a large layer of the best Bolsheviks in the war. The backwardness of Russian industry inherited from Tsarism meant that the needs of the population were not being met. Under these factors led to the rise of a bureaucracy under Stalin. You guys know I joke that I'm radically pro-bureaucracy. That's like my whole thing. This was fought by the real leaders of the Russian Revolution, Lenin before his death, and Leon Trotsky, who was exiled from Russia and eventually murdered in 1940. All right, so this is where it's a Trot paper. All right, okay. Stalin and his cohorts steadily abandoned most of the ideas of the Russian Revolution. Wrong. Committed a number of mistakes. A few mistakes they weren't that big of a deal in the greater scheme of things, I don't think. Later, this became outright treachery and betrayal, putting their own privileged interests before those of the international working class. Wrong. Increasingly, the German KPD leaders came under the direct control of the ruling clique around Stalin. Wrong. But the changes with the KPD did not erase its association with the Russian Revolution or the memories of Luxemburg and Liebknecht, and hundreds of thousands of excellent workers and youth remained loyal to the party. Okay, true. All right, so the Stalinist paper, or that Trot paper, I'm so sorry. Trot on, yeah. It's just that. I'm sorry. It's our day of bad sources. We're allowed a day of trash sources once in a while. The SPD still had mass support among the working class and poor, winning the 1928 parliament elections with over 9 million votes, while the communists received 3 million. The Social Democrat vote represented a belief among some of the sections of the population that they would be able to solve their problems. But once again, the coalition government that the Social Democrats formed with the capitalist parties enacted the ruling class's wishes. The Social Democrats played the dual role of holding back struggle by manipulating its support amongst the population while carrying through attacks. This is true. Similar processes were taking place in many European countries. So the communists and the Stalinist International, the communist reaction to the situation was a massive error that would help prevent United Workers' actions against fascism. They labeled the Social Democrats social fascists, the main enemy of the working class, and directed the bulk of their campaigning against them. I mean, they had power at the time. This makes sense to me. With the communist members tremendously bitter at the Social Democrats' leadership's bloody role in suppressing the revolution between 1918 and 1920, yeah, that seems like it would do it. They found it easy not to make a distinction between the Social Democrat leadership and the continuing mass support that the Social Democrats enjoyed, especially among the many older trade unionists and activists. By Stalin's logic, no, every other party, not just the Social Democrats, were fascists, including the Trotsky fascists, and there would be no difference if the Nazis came to power. This led the communist leaders to believe Hitler coming to office would be the last capitalist government, opening the way to the communists having a revolution, basically. Not seeing the fatal implications of the Nazis' consolidation of power, this gigantic mistake was to play a major role in holding back opposition to the Nazis. All right, Fork, come on, bud. No, leave it. She's very concerned. She's so concerned that there's noise. Yeah. The Stalinist International, I know. It's reading a chat where you're like, what? Okay. All right. I love pickles. Fork is having issues. She's got a lot of feelings. She also did not get her medicine today. She has to take a daily anti-anxiety medicine. So she's very anxious right now. Hold on. Yeah, Fork can't handle the Stalin bashing. Maybe Fork's the true leader all along. Come here. I know you didn't get your medicine. You're very stressed. I'm so sorry. She's an anxious creature. She can't help it. Trotsky definitely had Stalin derangement syndrome, for sure. Oh, she's so anxious. Yes, I know. Look, that's the internet. Do you see it? No, she has no clue. Okay. Stretch. We stretch. Stretch. Do you want to stretch? Stretch. Yeah, not bad. She's dachshund. She's 3 years old. It's about to be her 4th birthday soon. Fork. All hail. Yeah, you have fans. You have friends. Yeah, the internet says hi. She's like, I don't know what's happening. Yeah, I know. I love you very much. Okay. All right. So, Wall Street crash happens, obviously. Economic crisis engulfs Germany. Huge anger happens among the working class who saw their conditions decimated by 40% unemployment and wage cuts. In the early 1930s, the Social Democrat coalition government with the capitalists collapsed, corroded by their policies, which were deeply unpopular. That is true. Hopes that it would solve the problems were dashed. The German capitalist class feared the growth of the revolutionary movements. The bosses desired not only to head off workers' movements and prepare confrontations, but also to reverse the concessions that had been made in previous revolutionary upsurges. After the Social Democrat coalition fell, successor governments increasingly used emergency, semi-dictatorial powers to rule. But as these governments collapsed, more and more sections of the ruling class came to believe that Nazi Party was the tool for this task. Hi, thank you. So fascism came into prominence in the post-World War I period, and many countries alienated groups of army officers, banded together in reactionary armed groups, and attacked revolutionary movements with the backing of the state. In Italy, Mussolini combined these parliaments with a mainly middle-class mass movement built with populist slogans. Social turmoil and the threat of socialist revolution led to a section of the Italian ruling class backing Mussolini as the best way out of their crisis. In 1922, after the so-called March on Rome, Mussolini was asked to form a government and began to establish a totalitarian dictatorship. Inspired by the Italian fascist victory, Hitler and others tried to repeat their successes in Germany and attempted a coup in 1923. However, as the socialist threat had already been defeated, what are we anxious? Yeah. Hitler's coup attempt did not receive the backing of big business or the military, and the leaders were rounded up and given light prison sentences. Not for them, the death sentence that many revolutionaries received, worth noting. The relative calm... Oh, we have... My computer's like, yeah, thumbs up. She's wild. She is so wild. She, like, climbs on my arms to, like, climb on your head. She tries to wear my hoodies with me. It's very cute. Yeah, I know. She's very much like a bird. Think of this as like a wild bird. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that likes you. So, let's see. The relative calm in social relations from 1924 set back the Nazis. During this time period, they had very little support. The mass disillusionment and radicalization in the 1929 changed the situation completely for Hitler. The Nazis started to receive mass support and large sums of money from big businessmen and other sections of the German ruling class. Hitler and the Nazis played on the widespread opposition, often describing their ideas as anti-capitalist. Which is true, and they'll do that sometimes, right? Carlos Andre Perez, Cap, who was paid by the CIA, did this in Venezuela. He was the guy, actually, that Chavez tried to do a coup against. He marketed himself as a socialist, but in this one magazine with interview, I think it was Life magazine, the interviewer was like, I'm confused why you call yourself a socialist when your policies are like Margaret Thatcher. And he was like, haha, I don't know, I'm not like a real socialist. Whatever, next question. And this is something we see happen in the United States, too. We see these capitalists market themselves as socialists all the time in order to trick us, right? So, this is what the Nazis did as well. In fact, from their beginnings, though, the Nazis had broken up socialist, communist, and trade union meetings and picket lines as much as they were able to. So the German military had been defeated in World War I, and they were forced to pay huge amounts of compensation to France, Britain, Belgium, and other countries. And the German economy was obviously really fucked up because of this. Crisis in the German and world economies during the 1920s affected the entire population. The rich could afford to shed a little bit of money, right? And even used the crisis to their advantage in some cases. Powerful unions were able to ease the severity of the effects of the crisis for sections of the working class. The middle classes, along with organized and unemployed workers, suffered the biggest change in their living standards, though. Unlike factory workers, they were unable to defend their interests. Lots of these people were basically flung into poverty. How do we know this is correct, since the text misrepresents Stalin? So, we've read other accounts, right? And this is why I'm like, okay, when you can't find one good source, look at 6 bad sources that all have different objectives. Pretty much everyone agrees, regardless of their perspective, that the economy was really, really bad in Germany during this time. So we can probably agree that that is true, that everybody, regardless of their bias, is telling us some of the same things. So we look at this, remember, we read what the right-wing perspective was on it. We read what the Marxist-Leninist comrade had to say about it. We read what the Trotskyists had to say about it. We read what the Holocaust Museum had to say about it. We're reading all these kind of sources that aren't quite right, and what we're looking for is the common threads, right? The commonality. Like, what are they all agreeing was true and real? So that's our goal, basically. And we'll see that, right? Yeah. 1922 to 1923, many of those ruined by capitalist crisis came together towards the workers' movements and joined the fight for socialism. However, this movement failed to overthrow capitalism and solve the problems faced by the mass of the population. I know, isn't she? She feels like velvet. Her hair's very short. It's very interesting. The light is really doing it for her. Shiny. Yes. You look just like Julia Fox. Yes, you do. Beautiful. Yes. Yes, Julia Forks. That's her. Beautiful. She could marry an insane man for money. Oh, you could, yeah, if you wanted. If that's the future you wanted. I'd support you because the conditions of capitalism make it hard for women's liberation. Forks a woman. Yes. Okay. So, let's see. So a lot of people came together in this workers' movement. They joined the fight for socialism. It really wasn't effective. We heard about that in the last text as well. So while the communist support was uprising, its ultra-left policies limited its appeal to many older and still employed workers. Fascism, posing as an alternative to the crisis-ridden system, was able to develop into a mass movement based primarily on the middle class, but also drawing in parts a lot of ground-down layers of society as well. We think about that here in the United States today. To whom does the specific, MAGA brand of conservatism that flirts with fascist tendencies a lot, to whom does it appeal? the middle class who thinks they can make money from it, very obviously, but also some of the poor, disaffected poor men who have that weird incel vibe, right? They're like, yeah, this is the justice. I've been wronged by society. It's like, you've been wronged by the rich, by the capitalist owning class, my friend. But you're like, no, I'm pretty sure it's women and minorities. I'm going to go fight for Trump. Then you're like, okay, all right, you're so close. But you can see that happens, right? So, Nazis' anti-Semitism played on long-standing historic prejudices, opposing socialist ideas on the grounds that Marx was of Jewish origin. They also attacked Jewish and foreign capitalists to deflect anger away from the majority of the German ruling class. What's up? What are we doing? Do you want to just hang out for a little bit? We're almost done. Yeah. Okay, so Biskowitz says, its appeal to many older and still employed workers, fascism posing as an alternative to the crisis-ridden system, was able to develop into a mass movement. Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. Behind the banners of the Social Democrats and the Communist Party were millions of workers. Beyond their membership, they had massive support. In free elections, socialist and communist votes, always apart from July 1932, outpolled Hitler. Not only that, but as the fascist threat grew, they organized defense squads, and they could have put up a serious military challenge to the Nazis. Trotsky advocated for a united front of workers' organizations, parties, trade unions, and other bodies against the Nazis. This would have meant joint campaigning and a united defense of workers' meetings and activists. A united front would not mean, however, its different components giving up the right to put forward an alternative analysis and program. But most of the Social Democrats and trade union leaders were not prepared to seriously fight the Nazis beyond parliamentary debates and newspaper columns. That is correct, as we've seen. They did nothing to defend themselves when a presidential coup happened in 1932, removed the SPD government running Prussia, then Germany's largest federal state. In March of 1933, they did not protest when Hitler suppressed the communists. This we all know from earlier texts as well. However, in spite of this treacherous leadership, the SPD still retained the loyalty of millions of followers. Only through uniting with these workers and proving themselves to be the best fighters against fascism and capitalism could the communists have been instrumental in defeating Hitler and have opened up the possibility of establishing a socialist society in Germany. I mean, that's speculation, right? We don't know. We know that the Social Democrats could not be trusted. They had Rosa Luxemburg killed. So this is very, very speculative. And it feels like the bias of this Trotsky thing is that the Communist Party of Germany was Marxist-Leninist. They were aligned with the government of the USSR, which Trotsky had been cast aside from, right? And so it seems like it's almost like this is about them talking about Trotsky being right more than the actual situation. I'm so glad Heather A. Mason worked in Man's Entertainment. She really does. So instead, the communists continued to say that the Social Democrats were social fascists and they were an enemy. Again, they literally had communists murdered. I don't know why this is surprising to anybody again. Like, this is crazy to me. Sometimes this even led to the Communist Party effectively working alongside the Nazis to attack the Social Democrats. This effectively is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, okay? In mid-1931, the Nazis invoked a referendum on whether the Social Democrat-led regional government in Prussia should be replaced, and during the same period, votes for the Nazis were increasing hugely. If the Social Democrat state government would have been removed, it was clear that the Nazis would have been the main victors. But the Communist Party renamed the referendum the Red Referendum and campaigned for a yes vote. So this is what they're saying. They're like, you helped the Nazis. And it's like, no, they literally just did not like you and thought you should not be in power. You murdered communists. Like, sorry, you have two enemies. That doesn't mean anything, right? People dislike you for different reasons. This provoked widespread disgust. The referendum was narrowly defeated. Okay. Whatever. So you see what I mean? This is very biased in how this is presented. Despite the leadership, and really what it's saying is, no, you should let us murder you and then you should still support us and work with us. And that is the ultimate delusion of the Social Democrats, right? You should let us kill people and then you should still kill innocent people. You should let us kill innocent people, and then if you don't support us still, you're the problem and you're just not playing nice. You're just not cooperating. And that's really what they want to do to you. This is the argument getting told to us over and over and over again, right? So, despite the leadership, the determination of workers and youth to oppose Hitler still existed. In many areas, desperate battles took place. Within the SPD, there was increasing opposition to their leadership's passivity and support for capitalism. That was the Social Democrats. Growing numbers of communist members realized the urgency of united action against the Nazis. Germany was really polarized, but by the end of 1932, some said that the Nazis were past their peak, the Nazi vote was falling, But this actually led the capitalists, remember, as we talked about, to back Hitler as chancellor, aka prime minister. So we talked about that as well. The capitalists came and they were like, we need to get Hindenburg to appoint him as chancellor because he's basically going to be good for business. They feared the communists having a record vote of nearly 17% of the population. And they were like, this is going to lead to a communist uprising. To stop the communist uprising, we need to have Hitler appointed as chancellor. And so on January 30th, 1933, a parliamentary coup installed Hitler as chancellor, leading a right-wing coalition. So again, the capitalists teamed up to make the fascists have power to crush the communists, and somehow the communists get blamed for Hitler. It's absolutely bonkers. Even at this late stage, a workers' uprising could have removed him. Getting more votes than Nazis, the KPD and SPD had mass support, the Communists and the Social Democrats, and their armed defense organizations were intact. But the Social Democrats and trade union leaders did nothing nationally. And the communist frantic last-minute calls for united resistance were, kind of fruitless. They're not going anywhere. Local strikes and battles took place, but there was no generalized offensive against the Nazis. So within weeks, Hitler was able to consolidate power, claiming that this was without even smashing a window pane. Hitler did not act in isolation. In March of 1933, all of the center and right-wing parties in parliament backed giving Hitler emergency powers. Even the Social Democrat leaders voted in favor of his first foreign policy statement. So even the Social Democrats were voting in favor of him. Think about this when we think about like AOC and Bernie Sanders voting to fund the Iron Dome in Israel, for example, right? Immediately, the Nazis began to suppress the communists, and as soon as Hitler felt confident, he moved to smash the trade unions and the Social Democrats and persuade the capitalist parties that initially backed his rule to dissolve themselves. Oh, Comrade Slay, bye! The following year, the Night of Long Knives happened, and Hitler dispatched those elements within his own party who had swallowed anti-capitalist propaganda and were demanding further anti-capitalist measures. Remember, fascism is like an extreme version of capitalism in a lot of ways. The terror that Hitler unleashed on workers, socialists, dissidents, gypsies, LGBT people, and the Jewish population is well known. Fascism waged a civil war on the population. Okay, so that's kind of it. That's the extent of that. I titled my notes, Hitler, Libs, and Trotsky. So we got in here 6 sources, right? 6 sources that are all bad. And from them, though, we saw some common truths, right? So the common truths that we're going to end on are everybody seemed at one point in time to work with Hitler except for the communists. The communists were the only ones that were like, absolutely never, not even a little bit, right? Even the Social Democrats backed Hitler's foreign policies at one point. They seemed to realize too late that this was bad, and they took a stand against Hitler in Parliament at one point, but by that point, it didn't really matter. It seems pretty obvious that teaming up together to outvote Hitler was never going to do it. He was appointed to chancellor in a parliamentary coup by capitalists. Every single element of society, from the liberals, the progressives, to the conservatives, to the outright capitalists, to the social democrats, supported in some way fascist rise to power, Hitler's rise to power in Germany. The only people who never did were the communists. And the closest thing they can come up with to say the communists helped was that they voted in one referendum also to remove the Social Democrats who had murdered communists from position of power in one state, which the Nazis also wanted to remove them from power. But this was not because they were working with the Nazis. This was not because of the same reason as the Nazis. They wanted to remove the Social Democrats from power because the Social Democrats had murdered communists, prominent communists, well-respected communists. And that's the closest they could come up with, right? Every other party, meanwhile, actually materially, tangibly, in some way supported Hitler. So it's absolutely wild for people to make the claim that if only the communists had teamed up with the Social Democrats, this never would have happened. And that's why I said, yeah, well, if only the world was made of pudding, Hitler would be swimming, right? Like, what is this speculation? This is absolutely wild. Maybe if the Social Democrats wanted or needed the help from the communists, they shouldn't have murdered communists using the far right's militias to do so. It's not a thing you do to a group that you're trying to work with. And it's really, really interesting. Commies have always been the good guys and are always painting the bad guys about theirs. Exactly. So this is obviously, we try to do the news on here. And this isn't the news. This isn't current events. We backed into history a little bit. But obviously it's because it's super relevant to today, what we see happening with fascism on the rise today. And I think it has to do with the news because we see, okay, ICE just shot a white lady soccer mom in the face. What's going to happen? And we see what? Like, no, are any Democrats calling to abolish ICE? I haven't seen a single Democrat call to abolish ICE, which is effectively the right-wing Gestapo, right? This is effectively the equivalent of Hitler's paramilitary groups. This is the Republican paramilitary groups, and they have been since George W. Bush first created them after 9/11 to go terrorize Muslims. Right? That was what it was first created for. After 9/11, go terrorize Muslims to get some sort of cathartic blood sport release on behalf of the American people so they don't go getting mad at the actual power structure. Not only did Democrats not dismantle them, they funded them more. Under Biden, up until this current Trump administration, Biden gave ICE the highest funding that we'd ever seen before. And Kamala Harris said that she would not abolish ICE and that we needed ICE and that she would actually be tougher on the border, tough on immigrants, i.e. tougher on brown people than Donald Trump was. So we see that, again, as always, liberalism is capitulating to fascism, right? Because they see it's popular. They're chasing the popularity of it. And also because they profit off of it quite directly. So somehow communists get blamed for not playing ball, as always. If you just voted Kamala, we wouldn't be in this situation. Why the fuck would we vote Kamala? Oh, if you just helped the Social Democrats, we wouldn't be in this situation. The Social Democrats literally used like right-wing paramilitaries to murder prominent communists. In what world would that be who the communists would try to ally with? Like, what? That doesn't even make sense. And they did try to ally with them, is the ultimate thing. They were just like, we have to be in charge, not you, because you murder us, right? And the Social Democrats were like, no, absolutely not. We need to be able to murder you if we want. Sorry. Like, it's just so deranged. So this ties in, obviously, with the bit of theory we read last week, Gramsci, neither liberalism nor fascism, Sovietism. Very, very pressing, more important than now than ever. So I know this was a digression, and I don't want to do too much history on here. I want to stick the podcast to history, deep dives, and this to be more going through the news, a little bit light. But, I think it is important, and it is relevant to current events, and it does play off of some of the other themes we were talking about last week. Yes, ICE was created after 9/11 specifically to try to hunt down terrorists in the United States, i.e. Muslim people. Yeah. And I just want to share this for anybody who hasn't seen it already. ICE in 2024 had its most violent year ever, like in terms of murders in ICE custody. It was still not as bad as murders in ICE custody in 2005. That was one of the first years that ICE was fully operating after 9/11. So I'm just going to show you this before we leave. I don't know the source on this one. I'm going to show you two. Because one, somebody just posted on Facebook, so I don't think that's super trustworthy, but I'm going to show you. So this one was posted on Facebook, and it supposedly shows all of the murders in police custody by the end of 2025, but it doesn't have a source on it. But this could be true. It could also not, but I'm going to show you the stuff we actually have sourced and cited. That was only through October 18th, I believe, of 2025, so it missed the last month. But this is 2005. When this is kind of labeled weird, this is actually 2005 this year. Okay. So when ICE first started, yeah, it was a murderous, racist Gestapo out trying to kill Muslim people in the streets. This is when I was in high school. This is when I was radicalized and doing anti-war work and getting involved in community organizing for the first time. Okay. And this was George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. All right. Dick Cheney, the same Dick Cheney who endorsed Kamala Harris. And then years later from this, imagine this. So imagine what we're going through with ICE right now. Imagine the same thing's happening under Kamala Harris. She's now taking endorsements from the guy who was part of the government, prominent part of the government doing this, who was the architect of the war on terror. The guy who had the foreign policy that reflected this domestic policy. Kamala Harris is running for office and is like, vote for me. This guy endorsed me. This era guy. He likes me. It's going to be cool. Also, we need ICE. We need the most lethal military on the planet. All right, you need to understand that shock to a lot of us who are old enough. We were like, I'm sorry, fucking what? That would be like, imagine this graph 20 years later, and you've got Donald Trump endorsing a Democrat. And like, that's like, we're supposed to think that's a good thing, right? It's absolutely bonkers. Source is The Guardian. Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's open this. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Data compiled from ICE. Okay, cool. As well as American Immigration Lawyers Association, American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. And ACLU was always holding it down, holding Obama era and Democrats accountable for this shit. ACLU, I will say, consistently was on Democrats' asses about ICE too. They were the only ones during Democrats' presidencies with any sort of mainstream reach who were like, what are you doing to immigrants? Because it was bad. It was really bad under them too. So I will say, okay. So this is the one I had seen before, and it was only up to October. So this was the projected, but hadn't finished yet. So this looks like it's actually accurate, and it's the same. 32 deaths, 32 deaths. All right. So this is not unprecedented. Any thoughts on FRSO? I see FRSO out at things. They're one of the two biggest Marxist-Leninist national organizations that I've seen. I think if you have FRSO next to you, they seem great. You should join them. I've never been in FRSO, but again, I see them in actions. They seem wonderful. And if it's not for you, there are other Marxist-Leninist orgs. The other national one is PSL, and there might be local ones near you. There's a lot of local ones in LA as well. So yeah, a lot of people don't notice this, but yeah, this is not, for most of us, this is not our first rodeo with this kind of shit. And there is absolutely no reason why Barack Obama did not abolish ICE after George W. Bush created it after 9/11, had it murder a bunch of people. Why didn't Barack Obama abolish it? It's crazy. Why didn't Barack Obama close Guantanamo Bay? Why didn't Barack Obama end the war on terror? Because he didn't want to. And as you see, even the Social Democrats endorsed some of the Nazi Party's foreign policy. And this ICE shit, this immigration shit, it's just our foreign policy turned inward. It's the same thing. So as our military is going to war in the Middle East, killing Muslim people there, ICE is going to war on the streets, killing Muslim people here. As our military is going to war in Venezuela, has our eyes set on Latin America in general, Cuba, Colombia, Mexico, ICE is going to war against Latin Americans here in the United States. And that's how it goes. ICE is our foreign policy turned inwards. So, yeah, Obama loves war and killing brown people. Exactly. I haven't been in the Discord yet. I don't know how to use Discord. Okay, Labutun Davey. I've been trying to join PSL, but they're not super responsive, but my FRSO is super responsive organized. Then I would go with FRSO. I would go with whatever's easiest for you in your area. And certain areas have more activity than others. Certain places will have like a bigger presence of one org than another. Just go with the one that's the easiest for you to get in touch with in your area. I will say the thing I know about PSL is they have this thing for people who aren't ready to fully become members that might be better. I don't know. It's called the PSL Action Network. So if you're not ready to fully commit to a party, or you want to check them out first to see if they're the party for you, you can join this thing called the Action Network with them. And it'll just have a way for you to get involved in things like ICE sightings, protests, petitioning, anti-gentrification things. Like, so when we did the thing about Venezuela, I was like, oh, Union de Vecinos did some of the election monitoring. I've worked with them they're in Boyle Heights here. They're an anti-gentrification group in Boyle Heights. They, I know, work with a whole bunch of orgs throughout LA. So like when we went to the Hands Off Venezuela protest, like they were there, FRSO was there, PSL was there, Socialist Alternative was there, Peace and Freedom Party was there. So a lot of these things work together, and the Action Network, I think, will send you to more things like that. So if you want to check them out, but you're not sure yet, you can try their Action Network too, because they bring a lot of people out stuff. You went to a PSL organized protest yesterday, talked to some people, they never responded to my forums. They might be overwhelmed with forums. They might be, honestly, yeah. But if FRSO is super receptive, go with FRSO. I mean, I've never heard anything bad about FRSO. That doesn't mean you won't hate it. I don't know. Like, I've never been in FRSO, but I've never heard anything bad, and I see them out at a lot. So I would say FRSO is good. Yeah. A lot of orgs are having a good problem of being overwhelmed with forums. Yeah, that's good. That's really, really good. But again, FRSO, if they're getting back to you, go for it. Hijabi Hive, PSL is chill. I'm in PSL. Yeah, everybody I've ever met in PSL seems great. I just don't trust anybody online trying to, I mean, I understand people being having their own mild frustration. Like, I have mild frustrations with other orgs when I encounter them out. Like, it's normal to be like, oh, this org did this. Bleh. Oh, this org did this. Bleh. And some of that's normal. But the people who are like, never join these orgs, they're evil. I'm like, bro, are you fed posting right now? For real. Like, I want people to join any org. Like, join CPUSA. Like, I didn't like CPUSA. That doesn't mean you might not like CPSA. Whatever. Fucking join it if it's near you. Join FRSO. Join PSL. Join whatever. You want to join fucking RCA, the Trot org, because that's near you? Not what I would choose, but go for it, please. We need people in orgs. Yeah. So, consider joining an org if you don't have a lot of opportunity. Join, a lot of orgs have those, like PSL has the Action Network, other orgs have these little Action Network type things. Join those too, it's better than nothing. And if you don't get a response and you have other orgs active in your area, check them out too. Do it around. Okay. All right, I gotta get going too. I was on here way longer than I should have been. But it was a good conversation, good discussion, everybody. And tomorrow we're gonna get back to the news. We're gonna get back to doing our normal news structure. But thank you guys for everything. And yeah, think of topics from the news you might want to talk about tomorrow. And I'll see you here. Bye.